Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. And Trump demands Nigeria stop killing Christians. He's going to attack them. Is this about all? Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, Trump is in imperial dictator mode and Nigeria is under attack. Before we get under that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get into the content. It's the war on Nigeria.
Trump himself put out this tweet the other day. He said if the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, USA may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. Boko Haram is funded by USAID. U.S. Congressman Scott Perry coming out and stating just that.
Your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding.
I've done the Boko Haram committee. Villagers kept telling us that in the middle of the night, helicopters piloted by white people kept landing and offloading guns, goods, and money to these people. They have no reason to lie to us.
President of Sudan, CIA and Mossad are behind Boko Haram and ISIL. I think it'll be probably an easy task for the U.S. to go in, send in troops or send in mercenaries to go in and take this territory. Apparently, war on Iran, war on Lebanon, war on Gaza, war on Syria, war on Yemen, war on Russia, provoking war against China and Taiwan, and war on Venezuela and Colombia is not enough for Donald Trump. He is now also threatening war on Nigeria. It's not really what you expect. Okay. This, if I were to compare what is happening right now with Nigeria to any modern conflict, I think we would have to look to Syria. What is happening inside of Nigeria? Like in Syria, there are a bunch of Al-Qaeda-linked extremists, Boko Haram in particular, but also recently JNIM, which is extremely active in the Sahel region of Africa, and Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, has been waging a war upon rural communities in the north of Nigeria, particularly in the northwest of Nigeria, for many years, actually. It's gotten really bad over the past few years. But what is so interesting about Boko Haram is not just that they're funded by USAID. Yes. It's not just that there are accusations from local Nigerians that say very odd things are happening, like white men in helicopters are coming in the middle of the night and dropping off supplies to Boko Haram in the villages that they occupy and take over. But also Boko Haram, like the Al-Qaeda affiliates, Hayat al-Sham, for example, or formerly al-Nusra in Syria, have a very interesting habit of targeting towns and villages that are sitting on top of some of the biggest rare earth mineral reserves in all of Nigeria. Now, Nigeria, like much of Africa, is a very, very rich country. They have untold amounts of LNG, oil, and of course, rare earth minerals. Why on earth could Boko Haram, this Al-Qaeda group, be so interested in targeting the areas in Nigeria where there are all these rare earth minerals? It's almost like someone is telling them to target those areas. Almost like someone's saying, why don't we go over here? Why don't you guys take over this stretch right here? And according to our local friends, local journalists like David Hundeyin, who has well over, I think, 1 million or 2 million followers on Twitter. He's like the most famous journalist, I believe, in Nigeria, and a strong anti-imperialist. Not only are they taking over these towns and villages where the rare earth minerals are, but after Boko Haram takes over and they slaughter Christians, and they slaughter the Muslims. They don't care if it's Muslims or Christians. In fact, over the years, Boko Haram has slaughtered far more Muslims than Christians. but they've also slaughtered a ton of Christians as well. After they slaughter the Christians and Muslims and force the local populations to leave their villages and their ancestral homelands, guess what happens? Miraculously, out of nowhere, all of these mining companies come in, and Boko Haram doesn't seem to really care about them. Boko Haram allows them to come in and operate mining facilities in the territory that they control. Now, what is obviously happening here? These illegal mining operations are taking place in the areas that Boko Haram controls, and the proprietors of these mining facilities, they are paying Boko Haram to not screw around with them. Trump himself put out this tweet the other day. He said, if the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I am hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attacked our cherished Christians. Warning, the Nigerian government better move fast. Now, what is the problem with this? The Nigerian government, led by President Tinubu, who used to be a cocaine trafficker in Chicago in his youth, read the Gray Zone article on that, by the way. Very interesting. President Tinubu, the Gray Zone, look it up on Google. The reason why this is all happening right now is because the Nigerian government doesn't have much of a military. Their government is a total puppet of the United States, and they are not allowed to develop a strong, robust military, meaning the idea of them seriously countering Boko Haram in the north is a non-starter. They cannot send their men armed with sticks and twigs into the rural north of Nigeria to counter Boko Haram, who's being trained, armed, and funded by the West and by the illicit mining operators who are now in the region. But Trump still has this great idea that, we need to go in there. And this is all to protect Christians. Again, forget the fact that I said more Muslims have actually been killed by Boko Haram, the alleged Islamist fundamentalist group. They've killed more Muslims than Christians. This is all being done to protect Christians. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the U.S. military is actively now preparing to kill Islamists who are exterminating Christians in Nigeria following President Trump's directive. Yes, sir. The killing of innocent Christians in Nigeria and anywhere must end immediately. The Department of War is preparing for action. Either the Nigerian government protects Christians or we will kill the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. Again, you understand the dilemma here. U.S. doesn't allow the Nigerian government to have a strong and robust military, and they are puppets of the U.S. At the same time, the U.S. government is saying, if you don't do something to stop Boko Haram, then we're going to come in and deal with it ourselves. Or maybe we won't deal with it ourselves. Maybe we'll send in, I don't know, Eric Prince, founder of Blackwater, to deal with the situation, because he's been very vocal about this. Eric Prince, founder of Blackwater, responsible for untold amounts of war crimes in Iraq, he tweeted at the Pope and said, sir, I have a better idea. Why don't you fund my colleagues to protect Nigerian Christians from the marauding Muslims who are slaughtering them in Nigeria? Eric Prince, this is not the first or the last time that he floated the idea of sending in his mercenaries to Nigeria. He's been tweeting about this incessantly. He's been talking about it nonstop on his podcast. We need to send our mercenaries into Nigeria, funded by the U.S. taxpayer, by the way. What do we think is going to happen when Eric Prince sends in his mercenaries to go take the mineral-rich soil that is currently beneath the feet of Boko Haram? What do we think is going to happen here? I think that Boko Haram will probably be forcibly displaced. I don't think that we can expect too much of a fight with Eric Prince's mercenaries because the U.S. is the one funding Boko Haram. Where will Boko Haram go? One would probably assume that they will go to the Sahel. They'll go to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. So in the years to come, they will threaten the governments, the revolutionary governments that are nationalizing the oil, the gold, the mineral mines in the Sahel, in those three countries. And they're trying to seek sovereignty and independence from the French. They kicked out the French military. Boko Haram will go there. And then in the next few years, after so many atrocities and the governments being threatened, the stability being threatened in the Sahel, the U.S. military and Blackwater, Eric Prince, they'll say, well, now we need to go to the Sahel. and we need to secure the Sahel. Now, U.S. Propagandists, war pig propagandists are all across social media now and floating the idea that we need to go into Nigeria to deter Boko Haram and other jihadist groups in Nigeria and to stop their massacres of Christians and threats against moderate Muslims. I advise the Trump administration to establish an emergency base in Nigeria. The U.S., oddly enough, does have a large presence in Nigeria. In fact, the U.S. is currently constructing the largest embassy of the United States in the entire world in Nigeria. Gunther Fellinger John, this pro-Ukraine maniac on Twitter, is posting the idea of balkanizing Nigeria into like 100 different tribal and ethnic groups that he found on Wikipedia that probably have no actual grounding in reality. So they're just drooling. They're foaming at the mouth at the idea of war on Nigeria, securing these mineral mines and balkanizing it, making Nigeria into a weak coalition of dozens and dozens of small countries that cannot defend themselves and will be warring over borders, so on and so forth. It's the same old playbook. It's not just me or David Hundean saying that Boko Haram is funded by U.S. aid. Take a look at this. U.S. Congressman Scott Perry coming out and stating just that.
Who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds, madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding.
One more time, what was that? Who's getting funding from USAID? $697 million per year on the books, by the way, from USAID. Let's not forget that there's a CIA black budget to do stuff exactly like this, to fund Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria, to fund JNIM in the Sahel, to fund, in this case, Boko Haram in Nigeria. Listen to how much on the public record we are sending to this group.
Your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds, madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan.
Boko Haram. Not just him either, not just me, not just David Hundean, not just our members of Congress. Former president of Sudan, CIA and Mossad are behind Boko Haram and ISIL. I think it'll be probably an easy task for the U.S. to go in, send in troops or send in mercenaries to go in and take this territory. But it's not just them either. Even the captured government of Nigeria, the U.S. puppet government of Nigeria, has admitted this fact that, guess what? Yes, it is true. Boko Haram is funded by USAID. This is the foreign minister of Nigeria.
On the Boko Haram committee, villagers kept telling us that in the middle of the night, helicopters piloted by white people kept landing and offloading guns, goods, and money to these people. They have no reason to lie to us.
That's the foreign minister, former foreign minister of Nigeria, saying that white men in the middle of the night would come on helicopters and drop off weapons, money, and any sort of support that's needed to Boko Haram in these rural, super rural areas of the north of Nigeria as they're slaughtering Christians and Muslims and taking over the mineral hotspots in the country. Here's some more breakdown from David Hundean.
Now, I know what you're thinking. I can understand why the U.S. might have an incentive to do this in Nicaragua and Afghanistan to fight communists. Why on earth would they do it in Nigeria? Who or what are they fighting in Nigeria? Once again, I'll let the U.S. government answer that question in its own words. The following excerpts are the summarized takeaways from National Security Study Memorandum 200, also known as the Kissinger Report, a document published by the U.S. National Security Council in 1975 during the tenure of then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger during the Gerald Ford administration. 1. Population of less developed countries, if it outpaces economic development, will likely create suffering and political instability. Instability that might be inimical to U.S. interests. 2. The U.S. relies on many of these countries for natural resources. 3. High birth rates may result in growth in younger individuals who come to oppose established governments if economic conditions do not support livelihoods. 4. American businesses and interests will become vulnerable to interference by governments in these countries struggling to provide basic humanitarian support for rapidly growing populations. In other words, the rapid population growth of countries in Africa and the global south, and Nigeria specifically mentioned, and the political and economic disruption that comes with having a larger population, are a direct threat to America's ability to keep cheaply accessing the raw materials and natural resources in those countries.
Now, what's interesting about this is in the most recent presidential elections in Nigeria, there was a candidate named Peter Obi. Not perfect, not like a revolutionary anti-imperialist figure, anything like that. But the anti-imperialists in Nigeria viewed him as a guy that could pave the way to something like that being brought forth in the country. He was going to be potentially the next president of Nigeria. He came in second place. He's the former governor of the Alhambra state. Very popular. Almost won the election. Almost unseated this US CIA puppet that used to push drugs in Chicago, President Tinubu. Almost won. And guess what? President Obi would not have been sympathetic to the idea of a US invasion of his country. President Obi would not have been sympathetic to the idea of mercenaries coming in to occupy this mineral-rich region of his country. President Obi would not have bent the knee at every single whim of the United States and the Trump administration. So the timing of this is interesting, right? You have Nigeria, of course, this massive population. You have Nigeria, this resource-rich country, which is beginning to look at alternatives to the pre-existing order, the established order of U.S.-controlled governments in Nigeria. Nigeria, the most populous country in all of Africa. These young Nigerians are inspired by what's happening in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. They're inspired by Julius Malema. They're inspired by the MK party. And so they're inspired by all of these revolutionary movements, and they're saying, why don't we do that here? Okay, maybe Peter Obi is not Ibrahim Traore, but he's a step in the right direction. At the exact time this is happening, after years of Boko Haram operating here, illegal mining operations taking place that are facilitating Boko Haram's actions and funding them, after years and years and years of this, the U.S. is saying, we need to lay our foot down. We need to have an official presence in Nigeria. Anyone else find it a bit interesting? Anyone else find it a bit odd? I do.
Export crude oil. Look, Trump just did something that should make every African pause. He didn't just condemn violence in Nigeria. He threatened to go in, guns blazing, to completely wipe out terrorists. His exact words. But here is what makes this story fascinating. The two faiths Nigerians are supposedly unalived over, neither one is actually Africa. And there is another layer, a massive economic shift happening right now in Nigeria, and nobody's talking about it. And the timing, that's what makes this whole thing very, very interesting. So here is what went down. November 1st, 2025, Trump posted on Truth Social saying Nigeria is committing Christian genocide. He says the USA will immediately stop all aid and may go into that now disgraced country, guns blazing. He instructed what he now calls the Department of War to prepare for action. And he added this: if we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet. Fast, vicious, and sweet. Those are his exact words for potentially bombing an African country. Now, a Nigerian human rights lawyer, Bulama Bukati, who's done PhD research on this, looked at the actual numbers. Boko Haram attacked 83 churches and 72 mosques. They unalived over 2,000 Muslim worshippers in mosques, compared to about 1,500 in churches. So these terrorists, they are unaliving everyone. Muslims and Christians, they bomb markets, mosques, churches, anywhere they find civilians. So why is Trump framing this as Christian genocide when the data shows something completely different? What changed? Why now? Because when you look at what's happening economically at this exact moment in Nigeria, the timing starts to look less like coincidence. Now, here is something that people don't know. While the world's been focused on religious violence, something massive has been happening in the background. Nigeria just built the largest refinery in Africa, the Dangote Refinery, biggest single train refinery in the world, 650,000 barrels per day. But here is where it gets crazy. Dangote just announced he's doubling the capacity to 1.4 billion barrels per day. That dethrones India and makes it the largest refinery. For decades, Nigeria has been doing exactly what the colonial powers wanted. Export crude oil, import refined products, stay dependent. Now, they are refining their own oil, producing everything they used to import. This is industrialization, economic independence. Now, religious tensions in Nigeria, not new. People being unalived. It has been happening for decades. But for decades, while Nigeria has been exporting crude and staying dependent, we didn't hear American presidents threatening to bomb them over religious violence. Nigeria builds the world's biggest refinery, and suddenly within months, religious violence that's existed for years become an existential threat, requiring American intervention. The timing raises a lot of questions. Now, let me be clear first. There is violence, real one. People are being unalived, and bringing attention to it, that's not entirely bad. I give Trump credit for that. If pressure helps protect Nigerian citizens, all of them, that matters. But here is what Trump's not saying. Nigeria is dealing with Boko Haram, ISWAP, heather farmer clashes over land and water, communal violence tied to weak governance. The Nigerian government has spent billions of dollars trying to rectify these problems. But these are guerrilla groups that hit and run. They hide in vast ungoverned territories. It's not simple, and Western media keeps framing this as Muslim versus Christians. But as Bukati said, Boko Haram are common enemies of Nigerian Muslims as well as Christians. The only way to defeat this enemy is by uniting. Trump's narrative, it divides Nigerians, and the only people who benefit from that division are the Tero people themselves. Now, let's talk about something uncomfortable. Christianity and Islam, the two religions Nigerians are fighting over, didn't come from Nigeria. They didn't come from Africa at all. You see, before Arab traders arrived in the 17th century, before European missionaries showed up, Africans had their own spiritual systems, ancestor worship, nature spirits, moral codes that held communities together for thousands of years. Islam came with Arab slave traders who captured millions of Africans. Religion became a tool of conquest, a weapon. Centuries later, Christianity arrived, and here is where it gets really revealing. King Leopold II of Belgium, responsible for one of history's worst atrocities in the Congo, he told missionaries heading to Africa, your essential role is to facilitate the task of administrators and industrialists. You will interpret the gospel in the way that protects my interests. He instructed them to teach Africans to disregard riches, while Belgium extracted rubber, ivory, minerals worth billions. Make them submissive, obedient, focus on heaven while their worth was stolen on earth. So when I see Nigerians finally building refineries, keeping wealth at home, moving to economic independence. And suddenly a foreign power threatens military interventions over religious conflict that's been going on for decades. I start asking questions. Now think about this. Nigeria has been exporting crude for decades, religious tensions for decades. But when Nigeria was economically dependent, exporting crude, importing products, playing the colonial rules, we didn't hear these threats. Now, Nigeria is refining its own oil, building capacity, keeping wealth at home, and now suddenly, violence that's been happening for years requires American bombs. The timing is suspicious. Who benefits really if Nigeria's industrialization gets disrupted? Now, let's be fair and look at this at multiple angles. On one hand, if Trump's pressure forces the Nigerian government to better protect its citizens, all its citizens, that would save lives. But let's look at what else is happening. First, domestic politics. Trump is courting evangelical voters, positioning himself as the defender of persecuted Christians. That's smart politics. Second, oil and industrial competition. As Nigeria refines its own oil, they compete with American, European, and Asian refineries. Economic independence means they need the West less. Third, China. China has massive investments in Nigeria. We are talking about infrastructure, telecommunications. If the US destabilizes Nigeria, that's a win against Beijing. And Trump is not the first to use humanitarian language. You remember Libya? 2011, NATO said they were protecting civilians. But Gaddafi was planning something that could have changed everything. The African gold dinar, a currency backed by Libya's gold for African oil trade. It would have challenged the dollar's dominance and funded industrialization across Africa. Now we know this from the Hillary Clinton email leaks. Her advisor explicitly mentioned Gaddafi's gold-backed currency as a reason for intervention. It would challenge French and American influence. Gaddafi fell and Libya, it collapsed. The currency plan failed. Dollar dominance in Africa remained unchanged until now, until Nigeria starts building industrial capacity that could support economic independence. President Tinubu responded, religious freedom and tolerance are foundational to Nigeria. The characterization of Nigeria as religiously intolerant does not reflect our national reality. Now, that's a leader who knows sovereignty is on the line. Now, people are saying, but people are being unalived. Shouldn't someone help? Yes, but as Bukati said, unilateral American intervention will only escalate matters and be counterproductive. The US has nasty experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. Do we want that to repeat? In Africa? In Nigeria? Bombing Nigeria won't fix corruption, create jobs, or stop droughts that push headers into farmers' land. What will it do? It will disrupt economic momentum, give the terror people propaganda, destabilize West Africa, make ordinary Nigerians, both Christian and Muslim, less safe. So the question is, does Trump's approach solve the problem? Or does it serve other interests while disrupting Nigeria's path to industrialization? Here is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Look at Russia right now. NATO's proxy war in Ukraine. US officials have been honest. Documents show the primary objective is weakening Russia militarily and economically. So Nigeria builds the world's biggest refinery right after Gaddafi was unalived for planning an independent African currency. right while Russia's been weakened for challenging NATO, right when China's influence in Africa is growing. And suddenly, there is urgent talk of military intervention over violence that existed for decades. Same playbook, different targets. Now, Nigeria isn't just any country. With the Dangote refinery, Nigeria becomes a global player. If Nigeria succeeds, others follow. Ethiopia is building, Kenya is moving, Rwanda is planning. But if Nigeria gets destabilized, it sends a message: don't industrialize, stay dependent, don't challenge the dollar. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso already kicked out US troops. Ghana and Benin are watching. China and Russia are waiting. You see, Africans are tired of lectures, especially when these lectures coincide with economic moves towards independence. Both Christianity and Islam came to Africa through violence. Europeans told missionaries to make Africans ignore wealth while it was stolen. In 2025, just as Nigeria starts reclaiming economic control, building what Gaddafi dreamed of, those same religious divisions are being used to justify potential intervention. There is an old proverb: when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. Nigerians are the grass, and the elephants, they are fighting over oil, industrial capacity, and who controls Africa's future. Let's not let imported religious divisions derail economic progress. That's exactly what happened during colonization. Now, here is what's at stake. If Trump's pressure leads to protection for Nigerians, good. But if this justifies intervention that disrupts industrialization, Africa's largest economy faces chaos. The blueprints for African industrialization dies. Other countries think twice about independence, and Gaddafi's dream dies again. But if Nigeria stands firm and continue building, this could be the turning point where Africa says, we will solve our problems and control our economies. Partner with us, but don't dictate terms. And that terrifies some people, because an Africa that refines its own oil, builds its own industries, controls its own wealth, that's an Africa that doesn't need permission. So here is my takeaway. Trump's threat might come from genuine concern. If it protects Nigerians, that's valuable. But the timing when Nigeria achieved these industrial milestones, that raises some questions. Why now? Who benefits if Nigeria's progress gets disrupted? Why does this pattern repeat whenever countries try protecting their resources? When foreign powers suddenly care about decade-old problems, right when a country makes a move towards independence? Now, look at the pattern. Look at Libya. Look at what happens. Ask, who benefits from keeping Nigeria weak? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, I want to hear from you. Is the timing a coincidence? Is Trump's threat purely about protecting Christians? Or is this the same playbook? Should Nigeria continue industrializing regardless of pressure? Can Africa break this cycle? Drop your thoughts, especially if you are Nigerian, and if this changed how you see it. I'm Asongwe Luis.
Has only one mode of operation, which is to bully. Two separate issues, one thing in common. First, Just today, we discovered the extent of the norm-breaking intimidation and threats that were levied against delegates at the International Maritime Organization as they were looking to decide a carbon tax on shipping recently. Veterans of the meetings said the entire organization had been left in a state of complete shock at the Trump antics, saying it's like dealing with the mob. And two, that became public on the day that President Trump decided he was deeply concerned about killings of Christians in Nigeria, but that his way of responding to that wasn't going to be to offer help to the government in stopping such attacks. No, no, no. Instead, the peace president posted publicly that he was instructing the Department of War to prepare an attack plan for potentially going into Nigeria, quote, all guns blazing. And because this is all about performative public gestures, the Secretary Pete Hegseth posted his response back online and then went on to post an utterly bizarre piece of video propaganda showing the might of the United States military while Pete Hegseth himself recited the Lord's Prayer. Remarkably immune to the self-parody of talking about forgiving those who trespass against you, while showing that, no, in this version of Christianity, you can forget about turning the other cheek. No, 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 Jesus goes all out to kick ass. For anyone who is under the misapprehension that with the trade war with China now on pause, most other countries having achieved some sort of trade agreement, that maybe at this point, the United States would begin to behave like a normal country. That has all been shattered. Day in, day out from this point on, the US government is going to be throwing its weight around wherever in the world it feels it can. So let's talk quickly about the International Maritime Organization issue before then coming on to Nigeria. You'll remember we talked about this one as it was about to happen. And at that point, almost all the countries involved were clear that despite the United States' disapproval, they were going to vote for the introduction of the carbon tax of sorts for international shipping. Then the next day, suddenly the vote was put back for a year, which had been the United States' fallback position. Well, it turns out that turnaround was achieved by the US, quote, ripping up normal global diplomacy rules and using bully boy tactics. A squadron of US officials intimidated and threatened delegations, particularly but not exclusively from African and small Pacific and Caribbean island countries, into dropping their support for the proposal. They approached them during coffee breaks to tell them that if they voted the wrong way, they would not be able to transit via the United States in future. They and their families wouldn't be able to get into the United States. A diplomat from one of the threatened nations told the FT it was like the New York street. They went from delegation to delegation, threatening them, telling them to go back and speak to their capitals, warning what would happen if they didn't change their mind. He added, it's like dealing with the mob. They don't need to tell you exactly what they're going to do to you, just to make it clear there will be consequences. Threats were also delivered to the governments at home, with formal diplomatic protests from the American embassies in countries such as Bangladesh and Japan and Indonesia. These were delivered directly to the heads of government. The FT said that one such protest that it had had sight of included threats of hitting the country with additional trade tariffs, increasing fees on their ships when they docked at US ports, and refusing US visas to the crew members of such ships. Creon Butler from the foreign policy think tank Chatham House said this approach would likely backfire. In the very short term, this might work, but in the medium term, it increases the chances that non-US countries will conclude they cannot work with the US, making agreements independently amongst themselves, which simply work around the US. At that point, I guess Trump could still threaten to invade them. I mean, having dropped bombs on oil-rich Iraq.
Revolutionary salute to our family Blockbuster for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute.
And mass troops with a view to potential actions against oil-rich Venezuela. Trump is now instructing his military to plan for an attack against oil-rich Nigeria. If only there was some common feature in all of those that might help to explain these actions. I mean, I'm stumped, but there must be something. Anyway, President Trump posted this on social media. If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. Now, having already cancelled over $600 million of aid thanks to dismantling USAID, I can't imagine that doing so for the final $32 million of aid, which seems to be what's left, really going to be that definitive. Hence the next part, I guess. And may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns are blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I am hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. And then the traditional all caps ending, warning, the Nigerian government better move fast. It's worth noting that amongst the financial support the US had been providing to Nigeria was included $7.6 million that was earmarked to help Nigeria strengthen its security capabilities. According to Nigeria's Punch website, that money is amongst the bulk of the support that was cancelled by Trump. But then there's a reason why Trump isn't quietly offering to support the Nigerian government in stopping the violence, but instead noisily and publicly threatening them with retribution if they don't act. And it's all to do with the projection of American power abroad. There's no evidence, particularly, that Trump cares about the fate of Nigerians, whether they're Christian or Muslim or anything. But recent events provide an excuse to push American interference into the most populous African nation in a way that will provoke a negotiation and pressure on the Nigerians to agree to something. This is the point. Trump and his administration don't want to support Nigeria to solve their problem. They want to use that problem as leverage to force Nigeria to give Trump what he wants, just as soon as he's worked out what that might be. Now, that doesn't mean he's not seizing on something that is indeed a real problem. While groups like Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa Province have used violence against numerous groups over the last couple of decades, often indeed against groups of other Muslims, nevertheless, attacks on Christians specifically have been increasing since around 2020, with assassinations and abductions of church leaders, massacres at churches, and wider violence in areas with predominantly Christian populations. That has led some to use the language of Christian genocide, which is the sort of high-stakes framing that plays particularly well to Trump and to Trump's base and enables him to line his generally war-averse coalition up behind his actions. In recent months, it's been echoed by MAGA figures like Senator Ted Cruz, who claimed last month that the Nigerian government might be complicit in the violence. This led Trump to claim that Christianity was facing, quote, an existential threat in Nigeria. Now, while the attacks are serious and they are horrible, that is something of an unhinged take, given that Nigeria has over 100 million Christians, making it more or less evenly split between that group and Muslims. But it's not as though Trump uses words according to anything we would recognize as traditional meanings. Trump's threats have received a mixed review within Nigeria more widely. Some of the most determined critics of the government there are delighted that Trump is putting pressure on it to take more effective action. For example, human rights lawyer Inabi Effiong welcomed Trump's move, saying that the killings had gone on for too long. He said this: if this is what it would take for the Nigerian government to wake up to its primary responsibility, so be it. Others, however, were reflecting that Trump was using the issue to market himself for his own benefits, not to actually help Nigeria. Human rights activist Omoyele Sowore said, whether you are Christian, Muslim, animist, or non-religious, no one should celebrate such rhetoric. The United States and its allies have a long record of military interventions that leave nations more unstable than before. The Nigerian government has lost no time trying to deflect this latest initiative to try to turn it into something more cooperative and useful. So a presidential spokesman said that Nigeria would welcome United States assistance to fight terrorism, so long as it did so in a way that respected Nigeria's territorial integrity. President Bola Tinubu had previously pushed back against the MAGA claims of religious intolerance in Nigeria. He is now expected to meet President Trump for talks in the next few days or weeks, which rather opens up the possibility of yet another Oval Office struggle session, with a leader being harangued for what can turn out to be utterly fictitious attacks. Worth noting that Nigeria was one of a number of African countries that had 15% tariffs slapped on them by President Trump. Some African countries escaped those measures, ones that had engaged and negotiated some sort of arrangement with the Trump administration, but Nigeria was one of those that did not engage, simply swallowed the tariff, presumably because it's not as though America is going to be growing its own cocoa or its own cashew nuts anytime soon. Well, now the oil-rich country with significant reserves of rare earth minerals and a comprehensive existing strategic partnership with America's main rival, China, may find that it's in the crosshairs regardless. If Trump can't get it to the table to discuss some of those factors in one way, well, he's very capable of finding another. And here we are. Now, does he really intend to invade? Well, I seriously doubt it. But by outrageously threatening to do so, he puts himself at the center of attention once again, which is where he likes to be. He gains credit amongst his base as the champion of Christians everywhere. And by threatening something that the country's president seriously doesn't want to see happen, he hopes to use the leverage of the power of that threat to get more of those shiny things that he does want. Actually sending troops into Nigeria with a massive network of jihadists in opposition, that would be exactly the sort of open-ended engagement Trump seriously has no stomach for. So these two items, the IMO agreement and Nigeria's security situation, they live in very different realms. The common factor is hard to ignore. The US is not interested in partnerships, not the slightest prepared to play by norms or any sort of rules. It will threaten and bully as a method of first resort. It will threaten and bully diplomats. It will threaten and bully heads of state and governments, backed by the threat of lethal force wherever it considers that to be appropriate, regardless of what the rest of the world thinks about it. Well, right now, yeah, it's working. But if anyone thinks this is going to change anytime soon, they're kidding themselves. Sooner or later, whoever you are, whichever issue or national interest may end up provoking the response from Donald Trump, it will become your turn. And if you cave that first time, there'll be a second time and a third time. You'd have to say that the sooner the nations of the world establish how they can do that whole thing of working around the US, making themselves less vulnerable to the bullying, the better it will be for everyone.
Stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. May very well go into that now disgraced country guns ablazing to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I'm hereby instructing the Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it'll be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs are cherished Christians, warning the Nigerian government better move fast. So he's warning them that if Christians continue to be killed, the U.S. will immediately stop aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into that now disgraced country guns ablazing. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, said, yes, sir, the killing of innocent Christians in Nigeria and anywhere must end immediately. The Department of War is preparing for action. Either the Nigerian government protects Christians or we will kill the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. Now, he says that he directed the Secretary of War to prepare for an attack, and Secretary Hegseth confirmed that that's moving forward. The Nigerian government rejected this threat. Are Christians actually at risk in Nigeria? Yeah, they are. The scale of violence against Christians there has been widely documented. By the way, many, many Muslims are also being slaughtered by the same group of Fulani Muslim herders have not only been attacking Christians, they've been attacking Muslims. Christians in the north, Muslims in the south. But Christians are also under threat elsewhere, and there's been total silence from so-called MAGA. This summer, ISL claimed responsibility for a horrific church attack in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Christians have been slaughtered in Syria and in Gaza. Why then this sudden, singular focus on Nigeria? We're going to send in troops. We're going to bomb the hell out of you. Why isn't the same energy being applied to places like Congo, like the Gaza Strip, like Syria? Could be due to Nigeria's cozy economic relationship with China, perhaps. Who knows? Maybe very similar to what's going on in Venezuela right now. Are we watching selective outrage play out on a global scale? Well, John Heers is the founder of First Things Foundation, and he's been watching this closely. He has traveled the world to really spread Christian faith, and is watching this unfold in real time. John, great to have you on the show.
Clayton, Natalie, I'm very happy to be here, and it's crazy what's going on. And as a lover of West Africa, it's not what you think it is. That's what's happening.
Well, maybe you can unpack that. So what do we think it is, or not us, but how are they putting this out there, covering this up? And then what is the truth here?
Look, it's Machiavellian politics demands that you demonstrate authority and that you acquire power. And this is all it's about. The Christian words get used from time to time in order to make sense of the electorate and who's going to vote for whom. But when you're in West Africa, there's a quilt of Muslims and Christians living together in various places. It happens all the time. Where we work in Sierra Leone, you see people connected in the same family, Muslim and Christian. And so the messages that are being used right now, and I think something has to be said about President Trump. It's really important that Christianity isn't something that you use with word. It's not a word faith. It's something that fundamentally that allows you to die to your own desires. That's what Christianity is. And politics actually is the opposite. And so what I think is being put out there is whatever serves neocon interests since World War II. And those interests are always about empire. They're no longer about republic. And I can say one thing, I don't want to go on and on, but I'll tell you this about West Africans. I lived in Mali. I learned Bambara. I understand the way people think. People are generally good. Whether they're Muslim or Christian, they're generally good. What's not good is the way we as an empire understand these humble people.
Well,
very,
sure.
very vicious the way we approach just very ancient communities who are really just trying to figure out how to manage themselves within the global economy, which is an economy for the enlightened wealthy. So I could go on, but I'm happy to be here, and I don't want to ruin I want to be able to come back.
Well, what we want from you is an explanation of what we don't understand. And we don't want to come at this from a political explanation of a country that is saying we will use the Bible to kill. I think most of us, if you've read the Bible, you know that we are not God. It's not on us to kill pretty much ever. You don't kill, right? Unless somebody is threatening you and you defend yourself. So here is an American politician saying people are killing Christians. We take it upon ourselves to kill those people. We are now God. I think we can pretty much reject that, even as we understand that there is violence against Christians in Africa. So maybe take that one thing at a time. What is the scale of violence against Christians?
Right.
And why is the United States picking just this one?
So we're not on the ground, our work in Nigeria. So it's important that I don't say things I don't know. I will say this. We were on the ground in Sierra Leone, the very tail end of some of the most violent things there. And even then, what you have are pictures and live recordings of very violent things that are happening in pockets. And I can say that much like in Gaza, what Boko Haram is trying to do in that part of Nigeria is clean it up of potential power players who don't share worldviews. So the worldview here is really important. A Christian worldview is different than an Islamic worldview, but a Christian worldview is very close to a traditional Muslim worldview in the sense that they are not using violence, most Muslims, to create suffering. They will. And so I want to say that's really important. So I would say this to you, like in Gaza, the decisions that are being made are first about who has the power and how do they keep the power. And I don't think it's what we think it is. And I do, Clayton, you were talking about China. This is really important. In our work, we're on 4 different continents. I never, in Guatemala and Central, wherever we go, you find the Chinese at work building ports and infrastructure.
Right.
And wherever you see that, there's already been deals made for years about who's going to run that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know the connection of China in Nigeria well enough to speak, but I would bet a lot of dough that that's going on.
If you're a homeowner, you need to pay attention to this. The FBI has been warning about a type of real estate fraud that is on the rise. It's called title theft, and your equity of your home is the target in all of this. Here's how it works. Criminals basically using it for nefarious purposes. So you will actually step in, absolute focus from Russia, from China right now. And so when you're making these power plays in Venezuela and Africa, you have the Wagner group of Russia in Africa, like all eyes on Africa right now. So when I hear that Christians are being attacked, like that's awful. However, I want to know the real story in the same way that I wanted to know why you just ignored all the Christians being attacked in Syria. Why did you ignore the Christians being attacked in Gaza? But now you're really focused on Nigeria all of a sudden, and we're going to bomb everyone.
Well, I'm an Orthodox Christian. You know, like many Palestinians, like many Syrians, many Russians, Ukrainians, and we get the inside baseball on this. My father was a priest in a Palestinian parish. I never was under any illusions about Israel and what happens to Christians in that part of the world. They're not
Can you explain that? What do you mean? Is that it was taught to you that Palestinian Christians are unsafe? So
let's talk about unsafe for a second. They're unsafe in the sense that they're just as unwanted as the Muslim population in Palestine. Both share the same problem, is that they don't fully support the Zionists. And I say Zionists, I'm not talking about individual people. The Zionist plan in the Middle East. That is not something that Orthodox Palestinian Christians care about. And since Israel has made its push in the last 40 years, Palestinian Christians have left. And they've died in numbers during this particular push. And so we hear about all this. Orthodox Christians hear about all this. We know. So but thanks to you guys, a lot of people don't know. In fact, most people don't know what an Orthodox Christian is. And that is also another issue that I think the entire of America has to wrestle with, which is what is Christianity? Because see, I don't know that people have lost track of what it is to, in fact, be an American Christian. How do I square that circle? Like, what is that to be an empire and also be a Christian? Like, what is that? How do we do that? And
right.
I think history tells us we don't do that.
I think you're right. But I think it's worth noting that Africa has one of the largest spreading populations of Christians and is on track to have a larger population of Christians than South America by 2060. So, this gives...
But what do you think?
I mean, if I were somebody who wanted to expand my military power and I was looking at Africa as a growing power center, I might lob onto that pretty early and say, oh, the Christian population is my cause de célèbre. That's why I need to be there militarily. Wouldn't you?
Yes, I would.
Or will you?
The problem is I can't think like that. the planning, the manipulation, it's hard for us on the ground who are trying to do humanitarian work. We do such simple and beautiful stuff. We can't think like this. And so when people throw curveballs at this high level, this power level, what it does for us people, we live long term in places like West Africa and the Caucasus. And when people talk like this, you know what it does for us? It guts us, because we realize that at a level we can't control, they're actually sinister people.
Right.
They're not out for your interest. And maybe I'm Pollyannish and acting like a baby, but for people who are actually invested in human beings, you know, like last time I checked, that's what Christians are supposed to do. It's hard to watch this stuff.
Mhm.
It's brutal.
When you say neocons, you
It's hard to
specifically
watch our leaders.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, John. I know we had a little bit of a delay there, but you mentioned neocons, and they're at the heart of this, of course. So I'm curious, when we're here, we're going to bomb these people. We're going to stop these these farmers who are attacking these Christians and who are attacking Muslims. Like, what are the targets? Like, what are they going for here? Because to me, it always sounds like money, and it sounds like, oil interests and mineral interests, and we're going to bomb them. Like, what targets are we talking about here? Do they have a headquarters like the evil, what did the Justice League fight? And they had like a headquarters, and you knew where, it would move all the time. And I'm like, we're going to go
Luthor.
Yeah, we're going to go attack their headquarters. Like, we're talking about these like farmers. What are we going to, like, is this Afghanistan all over again? What are we talking about here?
Yes. Can I give you I'll just paint a picture at the best I can. So there's going to be a military base somewhere out there. There was actually, and it was destroyed recently. But the military base it's going to look more like a YMCA. If you and I went there, you'd be like a YMCA with some soldiers. And then inside there is a general that's made a deal, and he's made a deal with a local mayor, and the local mayor's made a deal with some regional official, and that regional official is probably being paid through various sales of different products. Nobody has an allegiance to a national concept in that part of Nigeria or where we work in West Africa. The allegiance is to family and to father, the name of your father. And the name of your father is associated with, right, the name of your chief. And the name of the chief might be associated with a mayor, but the mayor is not always in charge of anything. And it's the same with national politicians in Nigeria. So each level, right, depends. There is no centralized authority. So when you start bombing people there, what you're going to do is take loose alliances and you're going to create strong, powerful alliances. And when you get any boot on the ground in that part of the world, you have the worst kind of war that you can possibly imagine, just like in Afghanistan.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just not good. It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah, you make a great point. There's no real power structure to go after. Even the Nigerian government is saying, sure, you can help us against terrorists, but you must respect our sovereignty. But it's a mess. Like you say, you can't come in with your Western ideals of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. It doesn't work like that. It's a spider network.
Yeah.
So
Can I make one point on that, Natalie? Just one real quick point. Most people, their alliance, their allegiance is with their chief. And that person is trying to provide them a way to sell their wares in a way that they can make it to the next week. And if you just put yourself in that position, most Americans are in that position.
yeah.
There's nothing different about Americans and Africans, except for, there's all these technological implementations we can talk about, but people want the same thing. Sadly, the people at the top are manipulating them constantly.
Yeah.
John, great to see you. Thank you so much. I first learned about your work, I think maybe like a year ago when you're with your interview with Tucker Carlson up there at his house in Maine. So anyway, spreading this message. John, thank you so much for your work, and thank you for your perspective on this. We appreciate it.
What a wonderful thing. God bless you,
John.
Trump is threatening Nigeria with military action. This is the so-called America First anti-war government, right? But instead now we are threatening Nigeria with military action. Now you might be wondering, why do I have a flag of China while I'm talking about Nigeria? Well, that is because this is actually about China. And I don't want anybody to get confused. I don't want anybody to think that, oh no, Trump is just now going to go and save Christians. We must save the Christians. This is not about the Christians. And I'm going to show you exactly the evidence as to why this is not about the Christians, but instead this is actually about China. Let's just start off with where we're at today with all of this warmongering. From the America First anti-war, no more regime change, focus on America president, Donald Trump, he says, if the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I'm hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. Warning, the Nigerian government better move fast, he says. Has the U.S. been particularly effective at wiping out terrorists from the Middle East? Or have we been effective at creating more terrorists? Why do we even have ISIS, which is Boko Haram has pledged their allegiance to ISIS? Why do we even have ISIS and Boko Haram at all? And it's because, well, you know, we decided to march ourselves into the Middle East and fund a bunch of moderates who turned out to be not moderate at all. And the next thing you know, you end up with extreme terrorists who hate you. And Donald Trump wants to do more of that, thinking that it would be a good thing. Going on again, you know, to reiterate his position on this, it wasn't a one-time thing, but instead here saying that, you know, we are going in. Basically, he's once again. Let me actually read this to you. He says, Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. I'm hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern, but that is the least of it. When Christians or any such group is slaughtered like is happening in Nigeria, 3,100 versus 4,476 worldwide, something must be done. I'm asking Congressman Riley Moore, together with Chairman Tom Cole and the House Appropriations Committee, to immediately look into this matter and report back to me. The United States cannot stand by while such atrocities are happening in Nigeria and numerous other countries. We stand ready, willing, and able to save our great Christian population around the world. This is appealing to people. I mean, this is how they do it. They don't want to tell you, look, we need to stop China and their Belt and Road Initiative, and they've been dumping a bunch of money into Nigeria, which we'll get into. But instead they say, look, it's about saving democracy, saving humanity, saving the children, right? It's like the babies thrown out of incubators. It's, we've got to save the women. We got to save the babies. We got to save democracy. These people are under a terrorist government and, you know, all of these things always. It's always something. So don't fall for it this time, which I know many people are, because but Kim, we got to save the Christians. We got to do something about this. Has been going on. The Boko Haram issue, killing Christians in Nigeria, has been going on since 2009. Over 15 years, this has been going on. Why suddenly now are we caring about the Christians being slaughtered when this has been going on for over a decade? Why suddenly now? It's not worse now than it was in other times. It's just that this is what they want you to do. They want you to pay attention to this so that you give them the green light to go and do this. And really, they just want to destroy Nigeria because they don't want China to use it for their Belt and Road Initiative. And Nigeria is quite important to them. Okay, Pete Hegseth, Department of War. He says, yes, sir, the killing of innocent Christians in Nigeria and anywhere must end immediately. The Department of War is preparing for action. Either the Nigerian government protects Christians or we'll kill the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. Two things going on here. You know, I didn't think it could happen to me, but just recently, someone stole my information and actually bought a car under my name in Texas. Look what happened in Afghanistan. That's the main thing we're going to be talking about here, and I'm going to explain that to you. But the other thing that's going on here is this. You know, we got to defeat Islamist terrorists. We got to defeat those terrorists, right? And a lot of that is, now we've been hearing that for a long time. And that's worked on Americans for a long time until Americans realized we're not actually defeating any Islamist terrorists at all. In fact, we're creating more. And look what happened in Afghanistan. We're so tough and mighty. Trump saying it's going to be swift. It's going to be quick. Yeah, like it was in Afghanistan. I guess in the grand scheme of things, 20 years, when you're looking at the billions of years that the earth has been around, 20 years is fairly quick, I suppose. Maybe that's what he means. But the other thing going on here is that this is narrative that Israel loves, right? They're pushing this narrative a lot. We've got to defeat the Muslims. It's the Muslims. The Muslims are the problem. And anybody who's a Muslim is a problem. And it's Muslims versus Christianity. And that's what the Israelis have been trying to push, that narrative. And they've been pumping that out there endlessly to get Americans to hate Muslims and side with the Jews in Israel. And so they use this narrative. They're exporting it not only to, for example, Zoran Memdani. Oh no, the Islamists are taking over New York City. But they're also exporting. They're basically trying to attach that psychological narrative onto anything and everything to basically brainwash everybody into hating Muslims. And it's effective. It worked after 9/11 quite well. And so I think they're thinking it will work again. And so this is why you've got Hegseth saying things like, you know, we got to defeat the Islamists and they can't come after our Christians anymore. And, you know, when you start tacking that in there, then it helps multiple causes that they're working on at the same time. There's no bad thing for them in using this narrative. It works in a variety of ways. So they just keep using it. Tulsi Gabbard, the anti-regime change candidate. Do you remember that? When she was all about, let's focus on not doing regime change. Let's not do this. I mean, what do you think this is? When you're going in, you're not really helping the Nigerian government. You're already saying, we don't like you. You know, you're not doing the job. So we're going to come in and we're going to defeat the Islamists. And what do you think is actually going to happen? But anyway, Tulsi Gabbard gets in on this and she says, thank you, POTUS, for taking action and bringing attention to this mass slaughter and violence being carried out against innocent Nigerians simply because they are Christian. These murders are driven by the same radical Islamist ideology that fuels jihadi terrorists who continue to threaten our safety, security, and freedom. One thing I've learned about Tulsi is that she actually, though she says she's against regime change, she is very much against Islamists. The term she uses, Islamists. And she has, one of the criticisms I've had of her is that she has promoted the entanglements, military entanglements against Islamists, jihadists, against Muslims. But when it's somebody who's not, you know, then she kind of, like Assad, for example, you know, she was accused of being an Assad apologist. Well, Assad is not really your typical Muslim. He's an Alawite. So it's a bit of a different religion. It's just, so she was fine defending him. Or Gaddafi. What was Gaddafi? I haven't looked up his religion. What was his religion? Gaddafi. I think he was secular though, right? I mean, so she was really against any sort of secular military, any sort of regime change on any leader who was secular. And it didn't really matter if that leader was brutal or not brutal. I mean, and I agree. The position is let the people handle that. They'll deal with it on their own. And really any sort of regime change or meddling just results in something way worse. So there's no sense in doing that. But I noticed a trend, and that is that she's really only for those who are secular. But when there is, you know, if somebody's suddenly, you know, when it comes to Muslims, she's all about going in and intervening militarily. So yeah, it says Gaddafi was a Muslim who integrated a personal idiosyncratic interpretation of Islam into his political philosophy. So he basically wasn't really a Muslim. He was something else. Like he kind of had his own either real way of looking at life, but he was secular. So anyway, there's just something that I kind of noticed. But you know, she's all for this military intervention in Nigeria. And my point on that is, you know, here's a government filled with people who said they were against regime change, filled with people who said they were against military intervention, filled with people who said that they were America first. And now suddenly they're not. Even the Nigerians aren't really super thrilled by this. They're saying, most of them are saying, wait a minute, you're going to try to come in. We see what you do, America. When you come in, we see what you do. It's not great. You destroy places. You make it worse. You don't come in and make life better for the people. It's way worse. Leave our country alone. We don't want to have anything to do with you. In fact, I'm going to play this video clip for you. This is of Omiyele Sowore, and he was a presidential candidate of the African Action Congress. And here he is saying, stay out of our country.
And, he's saying, but we as a country, we try to be responsible enough to focus on the solution and not the problem. And our point is this: there have been killings in Nigeria because of the exceptional situation that we find ourselves. Our government has made massive progress in the fight against insecurity, and we're calling on Donald Trump to assist us with military apparatus that is requisite for us to fight insecurity. We do not need the boots of the American soldiers in our soil. There has to be a respect of our territorial integrity. Then that means it fits, if the story or the report is correct, then it fits into the narrative of creating a problem, provide solution, and reinvent yourself. You see, as a government, we don't want to heat up the polity, but if you recall, there was a congressional hearing in the United States where the U.S. Congressman, I think Scott Perry, who was holding, I think, a hearing with the CIA, in which he mentioned that the CIA funded Boko Haram, ISIS, and Ansarud, all kinds of insecurity in Nigeria and its environment. And this is not the American lawmakers. It is a U.S. congressman under oath was questioning the CIA director. And he was saying that all of the funding for that was passed through the USAID. Now, but that's their domestic issue. And as a country, we know that if we begin to focus on the problems, we might not find a solution, especially when we know there are pretexts in some of these geopolitical drama.
Okay.
And
so
he's saying, but we as a country,
let me stop that.
We try.
So he's saying, we don't just, we don't need the boots of American soldiers on our soil, is what he's saying. He's also the Nigerian presidential advisor, and he was a candidate for the Nigerian African Council. So they don't really want us there. Now let's talk about the issue that has been going on and the killing of people. It is atrocious what has been happening to people. There's no doubt about it that it has been awful. This has been going on, however, since 2009, maybe even earlier. And Boko Haram they're not going after Christians. They're going after everybody. And that's what they've been doing. They've been going after everybody. They have been killing Muslims, Christians, you name it. They kill everybody. They kill anybody who's not them. In fact, let me pull up how many they've been killing. They have killed, Boko Haram has killed large numbers of both Muslims and Christians. They have been killing higher numbers of Christians, according to some estimates, but they're really just killing, they go in and they kill anybody and everybody. So right now they're saying 52,000 Christians have been murdered since 2009. So again, this has been going on for a really long time. The Muslim deaths are around 34,000 have died because they're more moderate Muslims. They're not converting to what Boko Haram wants. Their ideology targets both Christians and Muslims who disagree with this extremist belief. And many moderate Muslim leaders and worshipers have been attacked or killed after speaking out against the group. So they are, they go after anybody and everybody. So let's talk about how this has to do with China. China has been investing a ton of money into Nigeria and their Belt and Road Initiative. It's been a very big issue. Let me just go ahead and pull this up. Okay. So in 2025 alone, this year alone, China has dumped a fortune into Nigeria. And what's really interesting is that China dumped a fortune into Nigeria, or just made a pretty big deal with Nigeria, actually at the beginning of October. And that's when this rhetoric really started to ramp up. You'll notice that we saw this real social media ramping up from the Israelis mostly about, what about Nigeria? What about Nigeria? You guys, you don't seem to care about the Christians and the people being slaughtered in Nigeria, but you only care when we're doing it because we're Jews. Anybody else can kill a bunch of people. And this was like a funny argument to make, like a really strange, not funny, but I guess I should say head scratching. Stop and think about it. So you're upset that we're not criticizing the genocide of other people. We're only criticizing your genocide, but you're admitting you're doing a genocide. When you say, why do you only criticize us because we're Jews? Like, what about the Nigerians and what's going on there? How about you criticize them? but and the Muslims who are killing all the Christians, but you're only criticizing us because we're Jews. So you admit that you're doing a genocide. Is that what you're saying? But this narrative started popping up because of that. And then what ended up happening was, then the Trump administration started getting in on this. And it's almost like they coordinated. It's almost like the pro-Israel crowd went to Trump and said, there's actually a benefit. Look at what's going on in Nigeria. Not only are they killing the Christians, but look at what's happening between Nigeria and China. And this is your opportunity to serve both of your masters, which is one master is Israel, because you really are serving Israel. And the other master is your hatred for China, or your attempt to, not necessarily hatred for China. I wouldn't say that about Trump, but I would say his attempt to try to strong arm China, his attempt to slow China down, his attempt to, that sort of, like the infatuation with that. So let's talk about the major announcements, the deals that have been going on with China and Nigeria, which makes me think this is really just about China. In late October of 2025, Nigeria and China signed a major $3.5 billion investment partnership. This agreement focuses on boosting Nigeria's infrastructure, energy, and manufacturing sectors, including the construction of new solar power plants, modernization of rail lines, connecting major cities, Lagos and Kano and Port Harcourt, and expansion of industrial parks in Ogun, Kaduna states. The partnership was signed in Abuja and seen as a transformative move for Nigeria's economic strategy. You guys didn't really care about all of those. Why do I even try to make notes like this and then read them to you guys when it's, it's kind of a little bit. Anyway, they're doing a bunch of infrastructure and dumping a bunch of money into Nigeria. You probably don't know where any of these other cities are that I just mentioned, or any of these places, so they don't really matter. You just need to know that $3.5 billion were signed for Nigeria at the beginning of October, very suspiciously, and suddenly. That's what has happened. There's a big infrastructure going on there. What else is going on in Nigeria and between China and Nigeria? At the end of October of 2025, China reiterated its commitment to deeper cooperation with Nigeria as part of its new 15th five-year plan. This includes aligning Chinese economic strategy with Nigeria's development priorities, particularly in areas like infrastructure, agriculture, digital technology, and green development. China also expressed interest in greater people-to-people exchanges and celebrating the 55th anniversary of diplomatic relations in 2026. Essentially, they're basically dumping a ton of money, and they have been. In fact, I believe that they've dumped a total of $21 billion in construction deals in Nigeria in 2025 alone. 1 year alone, China, in the first half, actually, of 2025, $21 billion in construction deals, making it the focal point for China. In fact, let me show you this map here.
To be responsible.
Sorry about that. There we go. So look at this full map here. Let me remove this lower third for you so you can see. This is Nigeria is over there on the western side of Africa, and you could see there all of those green stars, those green circles with the stars in them, and there's like a cluster of them right there in Nigeria. So this is a big infrastructure spot for their Belt and Road Initiative. And they're caring a lot about Nigeria. They really want to do a lot of work with Nigeria. And they did $21 billion in construction deals this year. And then they signed a $3.5 billion deal to do more investments just in October alone. And this is a major port for China's Belt and Road Initiative. Nigeria, they have built up to be a major port for them. And suddenly now, the Trump administration is saying, we care about Christians who've been slaughtered, by the way, for over 15 years. Suddenly, we care about the Christians. We're going to go in there and we're going to blow stuff up. Well, what are you going to blow up? So, you're going to go to war and you're going to kill. You're saying you're going to go after the terrorists. This is what you claim. And then you're going to blow up a bunch of the infrastructure, all of this $20 billion, $25 billion of infrastructure that China put into the country. Let me guess. You're going to all of that is under the control now of Boko Haram, or Boko Haram's using it to smuggle their weapons to kill the Christians, or Boko Haram is, what else could they possibly be doing? But whatever it is, you must blow up the infrastructure that China just built. And then now, but you were doing it to save Christians, so it's okay. Stop being a conspiracy theorist thinking this is about China. And in the end, what do you get? In the end, you get China's halted. China's unable to really build out their Belt and Road. And what happens if you can halt their Belt and Road initiative? You stop them from becoming the greatest world power, which is what the aim is to stop China from rising up with their 1.7 billion people, or how many, 5 times the population of the United States, stopping them from becoming the world economic power, stopping them from controlling. And the way they've been doing that, interestingly, is throughout it seems like everywhere China announces a new big investment, throughout Asia, throughout Africa, throughout the Middle East, like Lebanon, right? China signs a big deal with Lebanon. And what do you know? The port explodes just mere moments, really, mere days after China announces that they're doing a big deal with Lebanon to use their ports for their Belt and Road initiative. And suddenly the port blows up. Oh, looked like a freaking nuclear bomb. But then they're saying, oh no, it was just like fireworks that accidentally caught fire and blew up. It looked like a nuke, but don't worry, it was just fireworks. Suddenly that's blown up. Suddenly all throughout Africa, there's a big Islamic terrorist problem all throughout Africa, throughout all the areas where China wants to build a Belt and Road initiative. I mean, if you look at the map, I can't bring it up for you guys. Well, I can bring up this map, right? Let me just go back to this map. China, the only foreign military base that China has, it only has one off the shore of China, outside of China, and that is at Djibouti. And Djibouti is right there where where Yemen, and they got to go through that little tiny strip of water in the strait in order to get in to the Middle East and to get out. And that's the only base that China has outside of China. So this part of Africa is very important to them. But suddenly in that part of Africa, Sudan and Ethiopia and Eritrea and all these places, they're suddenly having a lot of war, a lot of Islamist terrorists, a lot of issues suddenly. And why would that be? And then suddenly now Nigeria is on the focus point. Nigeria's been having this problem for a while, and the government has certainly failed at protecting the people. But a lot of people are being slaughtered. It's not just a Christian slaughter. So suddenly and then throughout Asia, Indonesia suddenly is having more, of Philippines having a big crisis. Like all of these areas, it just so happens that they end up having a terrorism issue shortly after they announce a Belt and Road Initiative partnership. Or what about the Uyghurs in Western China? Now we have this whole narrative of they're committing a genocide. We know what a genocide looks like. We've literally watched it now live streamed for the last couple of years. And you see it. You know what a genocide looks like. You can't hide a genocide. Where are the pictures coming from Western China and the Uyghurs? And so there were no pictures. And so what did they then say? They said, well, it's a cultural genocide. Well, what does that mean? A cultural genocide. And they said, well, that means that you're erasing the culture of the people. You're forcing them to speak Chinese rather than their native language, or forcing them to assimilate into mainland China, into the rest of China. And that's a cultural genocide. You're forcing them to assimilate. Americans saying this, all the while they're saying the people that come to this country need to assimilate. And nonetheless, they still, they get on China's case about this, and they say, well, it's a big genocide, so we need to basically halt all progress and growth coming out of that region of China. And we're going to threaten you. We're going to threaten the country, the companies that build factories in that part, because you're now supporting a genocide. You're probably using slave labor. And so we've got to stop you in every way, shape, or form from any sort of economic growth. And the reason the U.S. wanted to do that in that region was because there were a lot of terrorist activity going on between these Uyghur nationalists and China. They were attacking China, these Uyghur nationalists. And we wanted that to continue. We liked that. We wanted the terrorism to continue. And so we accused China when they cracked down on it, and they said, you know what, you're not allowed to practice this extreme form of Islam anymore, and we're going to send you to re-education camps. And in these re-education camps, we're going to teach you some skills. and then you have to assimilate. Basically, we're going to assimilate you. And we said, wow, that's terrible. How could you dare do that to people? And so when China did all of that, the terrorist attacks went down, and now they're pretty much non-existent. And so what are we trying to do? We're trying to hinder them and tell them, no, you've still got a genocide problem. And we're doing everything we possibly can. And the real reason is because that area, that Uyghur Xinjiang region is on the western part of China. And that's why they need to, that's a major area for their Belt and Road Initiative. They've got to bring stuff out going directly through that Xinjiang region in order to get to the rest of Asia and the rest of the world and toward Europe. And so it seems like at every turn, anytime China announces anything, suddenly there's a problem. So anytime, I think what I would say is anytime you see a news story about terrorism in particular, I would say that in particular, just do one Google search. And in your Google search, just Google, or go to AI, right, in some sort of research and say, has there been any recent news about China doing a deal with whatever country it is? Lebanon, when you see like a port blew up. Has China recently announced any sort of deals with Lebanon? Has China recently announced any sort of deals with Nigeria? Has China announced any recent deals with, and just, you'll see over and over, like Indonesia or wherever, and you'll see over and over every time there's a big news story that, yes, China just recently announced a big deal. And essentially what we're trying to do is slow those deals down. And we want to just blow stuff up in order to slow that down. Oh, you just spent $1 billion on that bridge? Sorry, it's gone now. Oh, you just spent a bunch of money reinforcing that port? Or you just did a deal thinking you're going to build that port? Yikes. Panama Canal, we got to take that back. China's using it. Everything that's in the news right now, many of those things have to do with China and stopping their Belt and Road Initiative. So it's just important to know the facts here. Because why would we suddenly, and it's not that we shouldn't care about these people being slaughtered, we should. And I'm not saying that there isn't a moral obligation to maybe go help them. Maybe there is. But I'm saying that's not why we're doing it. That's not why Trump is announcing it. That's not why Hegseth's saying we're ready for war. That's not why they're championing it. They're championing it for purely selfish reasons. And that is to stop China. It has nothing to do with the Christians. It has nothing to do with Boko Haram. It has nothing to do with any of that. And I guarantee if we go in there, guns ablazing, that we will make things worse because we're not there to make things better. We're there to make things unstable so that China can't use the country. It's basically worth nothing to them. Whoops, sorry about that. Can't do your whole Belt and Road thing when the whole world is destabilized and in war. And so it works for a lot of people. Right? So nobody's stopping Trump on this. Nobody's stopping the Trump administration. You don't have the Israeli, they're not going to care. The Israelis love this. They're saying, yeah, go talk about targeting Muslims so that we can then have an excuse and say we must eradicate all of these Palestinians from our land. They're Muslims. And remember how bad Muslims are? Works for them. Works for the war, the military industrial complex. They love this too. Yes. Talk about saving the world. In fact, we've been using this narrative for decades now. We want you to save the world so that we can continue making bombs and ruining the world. Sounds like a great plan. Love it. Keep it going. Right? This works for everybody. And that's why they're using this. And who it doesn't work for in the Nigerians, it's not going to work for the Christians. They don't care about Christians. They didn't care about them in Israel. They didn't care about Justin Amash's family that got blown up by Israel while they were hunkering down in a church, a Christian church. They didn't give a damn about them at all. So they don't care about Christians. This is about China. Plain and simple. That is what this is about. So everybody just needs to know, eyes wide open. Going into Afghanistan, going into the Middle East, it wasn't about all the things that they said. It wasn't about babies being thrown out of incubators. It was about oil, or it was about Israel. It was about something else. So we always have to ask, what is this really about? And this, the whole warmongering against Nigeria, this is actually about China. Thank you for watching. Notice the sudden explosion online about Nigerian Christians. Many influencers and politicians are suddenly weeping over Nigeria. Now, don't get me wrong. I think what is happening in Nigeria and to the Nigerian Christians is awful, but this has been going on for a really long time. And there are many atrocities going on in the world, but nonetheless, lots of people are suddenly weeping over Nigeria. Maybe it's because this is the new Hasbara campaign. Maybe they're using it to steer attention away from Gaza and to smear anyone who criticizes Israel as an anti-Semite who doesn't care about Christians. Watch what I mean.
Why doesn't anyone care about this story, and why do you think it's not getting covered by the media here?
Well, first of all, I want to say in God we trust, right? That is more American than anything else, that we have our Christian faith. We should profess our Christian faith. We should protect the Christian faith here and around the world. But, you know, if you ask the mainstream media, they'll tell you that it's propaganda, that it's lies. Even the special senior assistant to the president of Nigeria said the other day that Bill Maher bringing this up was propaganda, basically. It's true, it's happening, and I would not recommend your viewers go and watch those videos. They are horrific. We're talking about over 100,000 Christians over the last 2 decades that have been maimed, murdered, destroyed. Over 5 million Christians in Nigeria have had to flee their homes. This is real. This is happening. And to deny it is just simply a lie. And I think it's because the left and Democrats, they don't love America. They don't love our values here in America. They don't like people who are Christian. They don't like people who are spiritual like we do. I would argue they also don't like Jews, by the way, with their anti-Semitic behavior. But this is real and it is happening. It is the truth. And I want to thank Bill Maher for bringing it up. He's an atheist and he knows what's happening and he's talking about it too.
So the truth comes out. She says, well, they just don't like Jews and they're anti-Semites. That's why they're not talking about the Nigerian Christians that are being slaughtered over the last 2 decades. Okay, again, I think it's totally legitimate to talk about the atrocities that are going on in Nigeria or anywhere else in the world. I'm not against that at all. There should be attention that's brought to it, of course. But you have to ask yourself, what is the goal of bringing attention to it? Does the United States fund the genocide of the Christians in Nigeria? Is that something that the U.S., are we supplying bombs? Are we supplying weapons to the people doing this? Are we supplying funding? Are we being bribed and blackmailed and bought off by Nigerians here in the United States? Or all of our politicians, are they taking a lot of money from Nigerian lobbies? I mean, what exactly would you like to have happen, Nancy Mace, when it comes to the Nigerian Christians? What would you like to do? And why suddenly are so many people talking about this now when she even said it's been going on for 2 decades? For 2 decades. Now, the Nigerians, they're denying that there's a genocide. A lot of them are saying, look, the violence is against everybody. This is Boko Haram. Yes, it is a violent extremist. They are an Islamist crazy group, and they're going around, but they're mostly attacking Muslims. They attack Muslims. They kill Muslims. And yes, they're also attacking Christians. They're attacking kind of everybody who isn't them. And that is the big problem that Nigeria is facing. It is not state sanctioned. The government of Nigeria is not, supporting Boko Haram. That is not what's going on. They're criticized for not stopping Boko Haram. They're criticized for not doing more to prevent the atrocities of Boko Haram. But who created Boko Haram, right? Boko Haram is ISIS. ISIS that then traveled down to Nigeria, who created ISIS. But we could get into the whole whether or not it's a genocide, whether or not they're targeting Christians, who created Boko Haram. We could get into all of that. But what I really want to focus on is the fact that so many voices suddenly, when you log in online and you turn on the news today, all you're hearing about are Nigerian Christians. And this feels like a concerted Hasbara campaign. And the point of it being, see, you're an anti-Semite because all you talked about were Jews killing Muslims and Christians. Justin Hamash's whole family, his cousins were massacred in Gaza while they were taking shelter in a Christian church. But nonetheless, how dare you bring it up when Israel does it? And why don't you bring up it when the Nigerians do it? What is wrong with you? Completely missing the point. But here's another example of it. Let me just kind of show you some of these. You log online and we're just being bombarded with this today. Dinesh D'Souza, over the last couple of days, really, saying the hideous murders of Christians perpetuated by Muslims in Nigeria doesn't get a fraction of the media interest and even social media interest as Gaza does. Even Christians in the West seem to care more about Gaza than the fate of their fellow Christians. What's going on? Well, you didn't give a damn about Christians in Gaza. Neither did Nancy Mace. None of you did. Here's another, and these are all Zionists, ultra Zionists, really supportive of Israel. Here's this Vivid account that comes from India, but a real pro-Israel. 52,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria by Islamists. Not a word from international media, not a word from the United Nations, not a word from Candace Owens, not a word from Tucker Carlson. This is a real genocide. 52,000 Christians. It's been a lot. Many people have died in Nigeria since 2009. It began in 2009 when Boko Haram, ISIS, was created. And they've been targeting lots of people, anybody who's not them. And but now just suddenly everyone's talking about it. Here's another big pro-Israel Zionist account. Breaking: 51 Christians slaughtered in Nigeria's Plateau State before Easter. Where is the global outcry? Where is the world? I will not be silent while my brothers and sisters in humanity are hunted for believing in God. Wait a minute. You're Jewish. What do you mean your brothers and sisters who are... okay. Here's Representative Anna Paulina Luna. Again, this is just, we're getting bombarded by this. Christians are being hunted and slaughtered in Nigeria for their faith, and the world stays silent. If this were any other group, there'd be global outrage. You mean if this were Jews, there would be global outrage, because all of you people just target Jews because you're all anti-Semites. Maybe we're just not funding Nigeria. Maybe Nigerian politicians aren't, or Nigerian lobbies aren't buying off all of our politicians. Maybe Nigeria is not blackmailing and bribing and running pedophilia blackmail campaigns. Maybe that's just not going on with Nigeria. And so, yes, we could care about it, but what do you want us to do about it? When it came to Israel, it was obvious. Stop funding it. Stop giving them the weapons. Not in my name, damn it. Stop being bought off and bribed. We were sick of every politician going off to Israel. Now, I get it if you're Jewish. Like there were some images going around today of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff at the Wailing Wall doing their prayers. And some people were saying, oh, look, this is like, we're just sick of this. And they're Jewish. So I totally understand them doing that. What I don't understand is when all the Christian politicians go over there and rather than taking pictures at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or the Garden of Gethsemane or Bethlehem, they instead go to the Wailing Wall, put on a hat, a Jewish hat, and then pray at the wall. That to me is what I don't, are we doing this? Are we going to Nigeria and are we like, are politicians posing with the Boko Haram flag? Is that what's going on? No, that's not what's happening. And that's why people aren't sitting here screaming about it. This is Representative Riley Moore calling for the State Department to do something.
Virginia Congressman Riley Moore joins us now. Congressman, you're urging Secretary of State Rubio to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Okay. What do you really want Trump to do about this?
Well, what we want is for the killings to stop, and it's a systematic campaign of persecution by Islamic terrorist organizations, not just Boko Haram, but IS West Africa, and also this Fulani tribe that lives in that middle band that has been just discriminately targeting Christians and killing them. You saw the numbers that you just put up there. I mean, they are absolutely horrific. Making this a country of particular concern will limit and restrict their security assistance programs with the United States. So we have been training and equipping the Nigerians in the hope that they were going to stop Boko Haram and eliminate them from Nigeria. Well, that's not happening. And I think there is a question of there is collusion in between the current Islamic government in Nigeria and these terrorist organizations that are killing Christians en masse. So what we want is for President Trump to put that designation back into place.
Well, what I don't understand is why there's not more publicity in the United States for what's going on in Nigeria. When you're killing thousands of Christians because they are Christians and they're being killed by Islamic terrorists, I think that's major news here. And I can't understand why it's not.
And it absolutely should be. Just this year alone, Stuart, we've had 7,000 Christians murdered. That's 35 a day are killed in Nigeria just for professing their faith in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We cannot allow this to continue. We cannot.
Then what do you want to do? Do you want to go in? You want to invade? I mean, what do you want to do? Because it was really easy when it came to Israel. Stop funding them. We want you to stop funding them. We want you to stop supporting it. We want you to go on these news programs and say, Israel can no longer be doing this. This is terrible. This is atrocious. That's what we want you to do. But you didn't do any of that. You kept funding it. You kept sending weapons. You kept championing it. And you kept saying that Israel had the right to blow up babies. So none of that is happening when it comes to Nigeria. So what is it exactly you do want us to do? Are we the world police? Are we to go in and save all of these people? Should we take over Nigeria? What exactly are you asking for? This is what I'm not understanding. But the Hasbara continues. Here's Radio Genoa saying, in Nigeria, Islamic terrorists have been killing Christians every day for years, but Europe, corrupt media, and Greta's friends remain silent. Because again, what do you want us to do about it? What do you want us to do about it? And then posting these videos of these funerals. I mean, this is atrocious. It's terrible what's going on in Nigeria. It's been going on since 2009. And where were you all of these decades talking about this? Why suddenly now? Why suddenly today is there a concerted campaign that feels coordinated to say, look what's going on in Nigeria. And anybody who doesn't say anything about it must be an anti-Semite. Representative Marlon Stutzman saying, proud to stand with Senator Ted Cruz in defending religious freedom in Nigeria. Implementing Sharia law and condoning the murder of innocent people is barbaric. We must use the targeted tools we have at our disposal to end it. And then here's Ted Cruz saying, officials in Nigeria are ignoring and even facilitating the mass murder of Christians by Islamist jihadists. It's time to hold these responsible accountable. My Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act would target these officials with powerful sanctions and other tools. So Ted wants to at least sanction them. So he's saying we got to sanction the Nigerian officials. It's not like Nigeria, the government is doing this. They have a rabid gang of extremists that are growing and violent, and the government isn't sanctioning it. So why are you going to sanction government officials? I mean, my question is just, what do you really want to do about it? What do you want to do? What do you want to do about it? All they want to do, they don't want to do anything about it. I mean, that's the point. The point is they don't want to do anything about it. This is Hasbara to try to say, where is all the outrage about these Christians being killed? You're all a bunch of anti-Semites. You're all a bunch of hypocrites. When in reality, they don't realize they're the hypocrites. Because where were they when Christians were being killed in Gaza? Where were they when Justin Amash, a former member of Congress's family, was killed by American missiles dropped on them by the IDF? Where were they? Where were they? There's 60,000 American Palestinians who are being harassed by the Israelis every day. There's a 16-year-old American sitting in an Israeli prison since February with no charges against him, a kid. Where are all of these politicians? Who's the hypocrite now? It's actually you guys, not all of the Greta Thunberg friends, not all of the left, not the pro-Palestinian people, right? But what is this really about? So this is a campaign. And what we're also seeing in this campaign is a concerted effort to demonize Muslims. So this is part of it. What the Israelis, what the Zionists want is they want us to hate Islam. And so they're putting, that way we just say, you know what, to hell with them, they're animals, bomb them all, kill them. They want, rather than stop their genocide, they want to try to turn all of us genocidal. And some people are falling for it. I mean, that's what's scary. So what we have to do is protect ourselves and try not to become genocidal because of all this Hasbara, all of this campaign, this push to try to drive us to a place of fear and hate, which then turns into genocidal, maniac, murderous killers. That's what they're trying to do. And let me show you some examples of this anti-Islamic rhetoric. Now, if anybody talk like this about Jews in America, I mean, you'd be censored, banned, you'd be and rightfully so. But you know what? Where is all the outrage against, if you say all these genocidal things about Muslims, if you say all this hateful rhetoric against Muslims, why aren't you being demonized by society as a hateful, genocidal bigot? Valentina Gomez running for office. Please do not win. This person's despicable. She says, if Israel falls to jihad, we all fall to jihad. How much money are they giving you, Valentina? How much money are you getting from Israel? People are obsessed with the Jews when the real problem are the Muslims. They already raped Europe into submission. Israel and America are the last hope. And then this is her. Let's watch. Shalom, shalom. Is she Jewish? Let me look that up.
We're going to make Judea and Samaria great again. Those Palestinians can go to their 56 Muslim nations. Israel is a Jewish state.
She's not Jewish. She's running as a Texas Republican candidate. Everybody should reject this. I think at this point, a lot of people are rejecting this. At least I'd like to see that. But we'll see. We'll see how the voters vote in the midterms. Tommy Robinson, he says, Britain's future. I report today from Judea, West Bank. As I stand outside Jerusalem and Judea, the area many call the West Bank, and draws chilling parallels between Israel's security barriers and what's now happening across the UK. I first visited in 2016 to understand how Israelis live under constant terror threats, and says what he saw then is now Britain's reality. Are we living Israel's past? This is, okay, let's hear what he has to say for himself. Let's play this.
So I'm outside Jerusalem in an area called Judea that many in the UK would refer to as the West Bank, okay, the disputed territories. Now, I come here in 2016 to the State of Israel, and people ask why. I came here on a fact-finding mission. I'll be honest, I came here to look at our future, Great Britain's future. And when I come here, I saw these and these concrete blocks and bollards at every single bus stop. To understand why, and in 2016, we didn't have this in the UK. Our bus stops were free. Our Christmas markets were not surrounded by armed police. We didn't have diversity barriers surrounding everything. But in 2016, when I come here, I looked and said, that's our future. And I wanted to understand how Jews in Israel, Christians in Israel, how the Israelis live and survive with the threat of terror. Why did I do that? Because I knew we're now surrounded by the same idea that's on their border and in their heartlands. The same idea that wants to massacre the Jews, wants to massacre us as non-Muslims. It wants to conquer Israel, it wants to conquer Britain. And this is how they've lived for well over a decade. It's new to us. But what other security implications, what other losses of freedom are we going to face? They're the questions that I'm here to find answers to. And to understand how this nation, how they come together, how they stand and how they fight against this jihadist mindset, which has infiltrated their country and ours. This is not a problem anymore that's secluded to Israel or the Middle East. It's a problem that's in your city, it's in Manchester, it's in London. It's your Christmas market that has to have these barriers. It's your town centre that has to have barriers to prevent Muslims getting in cars or lorries and ramming down the street. It's our now town centres that need armed guards. We shouldn't have to live like this, and we don't, because we have imported this problem from the Middle East. We've imported it. We didn't have to do it, and we still don't. We still can reverse this. But I'm here asking questions, looking and seeing what your future looks like in Great Britain.
Oh, somebody needs to give Tommy Robinson and a lot of people a history lesson. I love that he's like, oh, you know, this is going to be our future. Can you believe this is, I'm here and look at the security barriers and the invasion that the Israelis are dealing with, having it totally backwards, right? The Palestinians were living there. So the Palestinians were the British, actually, quite literally, because Palestine was the British mandate. And it was under British control, and the Israelis showed up and literally terrorized British authorities until the British authorities were run out of town by the Jewish settlers that showed up, not the Palestinians, but the Zionists showed up. And literally, the Palestinian people were under the protection of the British. They were British, essentially. And they got run out by invaders who showed up. And then those invaders, put them behind barriers, and the invaders put them under checkpoints, and the invaders locked them basically into cages, and the invaders did all. So you're right, Tommy. That is a fear. It's a fear to have the invaders show up and terrorize you and then relegate you into a little tiny portion of what used to be your country. And they push you and terrorize you and slaughter you and massacre you, all because of religious zealotness. You're right. That's pretty scary. But guess what? It's not the Muslims doing it to you. And in fact, the only reason why the Muslims are sitting in the UK is because Israel decided to bomb their countries. Well, Israel decided to bomb the countries, but had America do it and the British do it. And so people fled. They would have stayed, but instead, the British, rather than standing their ground and fighting off the Israelis that showed up, the Zionists that showed up to terrorize the Palestinians, the British just said, we're out of here. We don't want to put up with this terror. And guess what? Their cowardice eventually meant the terror did come to their doorstep. But it's not the Muslims, it's the Zionists that continue waging war, currently bombing how many countries right now? 7 different countries in the Middle East, causing the mass influx. So where are you going to put the blame? Is it because these Muslims are flooding into England and flooding into Europe because they really want to do an Islamist takeover? Or is it that their countries are in ruins because the terrorists that Great Britain allowed, the British mandate, the terrorists that Britain allowed to infiltrate, Britain has continued to allow to terrorize the region. So he's got his history backwards. The invaders are the Israelis. The Palestinians are the British, like literally, actually. So unbelievable. But let me just show you. Here's Congressman Randy Fine. You can always trust this guy to give you a heavy dose of genocidal Zionism. And he says, we need to stop pretending Islam is compatible with American values. What would you like to do about that, Congressman Randy Fine? You'd like to expel all the Muslims? John Strand also says a Judeo-Christian nation is not compatible with Islam. The United States is not up for grabs. End of story. The United States is not a Judeo-Christian nation. Actually, the United States is not a Judeo nation. The United States is actually not even a Christian nation. A lot of the founding fathers were natalists, they were deists. I mean, they weren't even Christian. Half of them were deists. They weren't even Christian at all. Founding fathers. They said America would be religiously free. Yeah, you could say that, well, we have a lot of Christian, like Christian kind of rituals or Christian customs or Christian culture embedded into our country. Sure, but we are not a religious country at all. We're not meant to be. That was the way the founding fathers wanted it. But they'd be rolling in their graves if they could see what was going on today with the persecution of religious freedom, persecuting Muslims around this country, making them feel unwelcome, trying to turn them. And this should be even more disgusting, that this is a Hasbara campaign, and I believe probably paid for. I'm just guessing on that. I don't have any evidence of that, but I am guessing just from seeing how concerted the effort is, how coordinated the effort is. It feels like a paid or like you got your directive from your AIPAC handler, sort of coordinated messaging that's going on over the last couple of days that is meant to demonize Muslims, that is meant to demonize anybody who doesn't call out the genocide going on in Nigeria. It's meant to demonize all of that and deflect away from the reality of what has gone on in this nation, which is we are a nation under blackmail, under bribery, under brainwashing by the Zionists. They have completely taken over. We are no longer a sovereign nation. That is pretty obvious to a lot of us right now, which is why so many people are fighting for America first. America first. We want America first. How hard is that? How difficult is that? That's what we really want. And we really want an America that's free, religiously free, allowing anybody to practice whatever religion they want. So, but apparently, no, it's a Judeo-Christian. You could only be Jewish or you could only be Christian, and that's it. Nobody else is allowed. I mean, this Hasbara campaign, totally and completely despicable. So I wanted to point it out to you. Tell me what you think of it. You can email me, kim@KimIverson.com, or comment down below. But it feels like, to me, a concerted Hasbara campaign. Am I the only one that's noticing? Are you noticing?
You doing all right?
I'm not bad. You?
I am doing okay. I'm doing okay. Bit show weirdness today with other guests, but it's okay. Thank you for joining me. I deeply appreciate it. David Houdayan. He is investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, and the 2023 James Curry Fellow at Cambridge University. Can I out your other thing, or still no? That's it.
Can you do what, sorry?
Can I give publicity to your other endeavor? I don't want to out
Oh,
it.
yeah,
if you don't
yeah,
want
yeah,
to.
yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
David has a radio
Anything you
station,
want, it's fine.
and that radio station has just been launched. David, what is the name of that radio station?
It's not a radio station. It's an online platform.
It's an online platform. Okay. Either way, it's fantastic, and I love the fact that you're able to pull this off. What is the name of the platform so the audience will know and they can find you?
Right. It's called the Spearhead. So The handle on Twitter and on Instagram is at spearhead_AF. So Spearhead Africa.
Very cool. Very cool. How did the launch go, by the way?
Just 1 second. Is my picture lagging? Because if it is, I can switch my Wi-Fi. So just let me know so
No,
that
you look
it
fine.
doesn't.
So far, you look good. No, you look good.
All right.
You look good.
All right. Perfect. Perfect.
How did the launch go, by the way?
Very stressful, but I'm alive, so let's just do it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I wanted to bring you on. Initially, there were other topics from last week, but this week, Donald Trump has effectively threatened Nigeria, claiming that there's a genocide of Christians that are taking place in Nigeria. Now, let's put aside the fact that Donald Trump effectively paid billions of dollars for the massacre and the murder of Palestinians. Let's put aside the fact that Israel is still murdering Palestinians. I mean, they murdered 100 the other day in 24 hours. Let's put all that aside, which is a massive amount to put aside. Is there a genocide of Christians taking place in Nigeria at the moment?
There is a genocide of Nigerians taking place in Nigeria. Now, the use of the word genocide, I have to admit, is very problematic because where you have a sustained pattern of mass killings affecting both Christian and Muslim populations, and the attackers are supposedly Islamists. What do you call that exactly? This, I guess, has been a problem that even I have contributed to in some way. As you may recall, I was part of a project team that put together a report back in 2019, which was presented to the then U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, which led to Nigeria being designated as a country of particular concern back in November 2020, shortly before Trump, in October 2020, shortly before Trump lost the U.S. election. And the title of that report was Genocide in Nigeria, Silent Slaughter, Genocide in Nigeria and Implications for the International Community. And I guess the thrust of that report was that even though both Muslims and Christians are being killed in these areas, that the rate of Christian deaths is higher than the proportion of Christian deaths is higher than the proportion of the Christian population in those areas. So let me use a simple illustration to explain this. So assuming there's a village and there's 1,000 residents and there are 900 Muslims and 100 Christians in that area, and then the attackers come in and they kill 100 people and they kill 60 Muslims and 40 Christians, right? So the thrust of that report is that based on the population share that Christians have, they were being killed at a disproportionate rate, which is why the word genocide was then used. But the report also made it very clear, stated that overall more Muslims actually have died in these mass killings. So, which is why I said that the use of the word genocide is a problem. It's probably something that I have contributed to as well. And in hindsight, it has created problems even for me now, because obviously at the time when I contributed to this report, maybe I didn't have the level of geopolitical awareness that I do now. And I didn't quite understand the significance of working on such a report and then submitting it to a foreign government, for a foreign government to essentially sanction your own country. In hindsight, if I were to go back in time, would I do the same thing? Probably wouldn't, because I can sort of see the world from a wider perspective now. But at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. And some of that work, which I myself did, some of that documentation work, is what is now being cited and what is now being used as a premise for this myth, this falsehood that is being peddled now by Donald Trump and his, white nationalist friends, that there is this campaign to exterminate Christians from Nigeria, that Muslims are fine in Nigeria, and that Christians are being specifically targeted, and basically Christians are going to be wiped out from Nigeria if something isn't done. which is a stupid, ridiculous idea. Nigeria's population split between Christian and Muslim is almost 50-50. I think it's the official numbers put it at about 48% Christian and about 52 or 51% Muslim. So how do you propose to exterminate half of the population in the first place? Mathematically, the numbers don't make sense. And then on the ground, that is not what is happening. Both Christians and Muslims are being killed, are being attacked. And Muslims there are actually more Muslims dying. However, the argument that report that I worked on put forward, and the argument that is the basic argument that is being cited, I think rather disingenuously now in hindsight, is that because the areas where this violence is affecting are generally Muslim dominated areas, and Christians are a minority in those areas, and the violence there is affecting Christians at a rate that is disproportionate to their population share in those areas, then it's a genocide of Christians, which completely ignores the obvious question that the Muslims who died, who number more than the Christians who died, what do you call that then? Is it also a genocide? You can't call it a genocide because it's the attackers are purportedly Muslims. So if it's Muslims killing other Muslims, what do you call that? And that's a question no one has answered, and everyone has sort of stayed away from. So that's kind of like an overview of this very confusing situation that we find ourselves in now, and a very politically explosive situation now.
Yeah, I mean, Trump went so far as to say he's talking about putting in U.S. military on the ground. Who is doing the killing? What groups are responsible for the killings of both Muslims and Christians in these areas?
So we know the names of a few. So groups like Boko Haram, groups like ISWAP, that's Islamic State West Africa Province, groups like the JNIM, which recently conducted its first attack in Nigeria, groups like AQIM, that's Al Qaeda in the Maghreb, which has also, the Maghreb is basically North Africa, but it's also, that group has supposedly been active in Nigeria as well. And then there's all sorts of other armed groups that we actually don't even know who and what they are, right? So the issue with northern Nigeria, which by the way is part of the Sahel region geographically, the issue with the Sahel region in general, that because it's so vast, and because a lot of it is so unpopulated or sparsely populated, a lot of it is basically ungoverned territory.
I see.
Right. So because of that, it's actually quite difficult to actually even quantify who and what is active in these areas, what exactly is going on. So in Nigeria, there's a popular term in the media which is now used to encapsulate all of these things. They just call them bandits or unknown gunmen, because we literally don't know who these people are at this point.
Wow. Okay. I guess the secondary question is, where are they getting the military armaments from? I mean, military armaments are expensive. Bullets are expensive, guns, etc. Where's the stuff coming from? How are these groups being armed, or do we know?
So the popular and I guess the orthodox answer to that question is that after the fall of Gaddafi, Libya's arms stockpiles were raided by all sorts of characters, and that those arms made their way across the Sahara, then across the Sahel, and those arms are what are feeding the violence all over these places. There's certainly an element of truth in that. However, how much of Gaddafi's stockpile could have kept this incredibly wide-ranging campaign of violence going for more than a decade without restocking, without replenishing? Did Gaddafi have that much military technology sitting in stockpiles? So I think it's a very important question to ask. Military equipment is not cheap, and military equipment can't be bought off the shelf. It's very expensive, and it has to be bought using very specific supply chains. A lot of this, the military hardware that is being discovered in the hands of these terrorists, such as, for example, armed drones, you then have to ask the question, where is a terrorist getting a military-grade drone from? Those things are not sold off the shelf. Right. You don't buy those things off the black market. Maybe you can buy a rocket launcher off the black market, maybe. A Stinger missile, maybe. But like an armed drone, the sort that is being used against Russia by Ukraine, for example, this has been identified in Nigeria by the Nigerian military that Boko Haram has been seen using Ukraine-style armed drones or suicide drones. So you then start to ask yourself, these are supposedly, semi-literate, uneducated, rubber slippers wearing, not very intelligent Islamists trekking through the Sahel without showering for days. So where is the expertise and know-how for operating that sort of extremely advanced equipment, right? We're talking about, when we talk about military drones, we're not talking about your civilian DJIs that that work at short distance, or that you can put a 4G SIM card into it. And this is stuff that requires like satellite connections with huge running costs, right? We're talking about drones that have like $1,000 per hour running costs. So where on earth are these people getting such equipment from? That's a very important question to ask. And more importantly, the entities that manufacture this equipment and that control these supply chains, who are those entities? Where are those supply chains residents? Sorry, there's a phone ringing in the background, so that's the noise that you're hearing. We're just gonna have to.
You're fine. I don't even hear it. I don't even hear it, to be honest.
Where, if you recall, I think this was last year. I think this was June last year, where an attack was carried out in Mali by this so-called JNIM. Was it JNIM? No, this supposed Free Azawad movement. So essentially, there's a group in northern Mali that are it's like a breakaway sort of a secessionist group, which is being funded by France. So they call themselves the Republic of Azawad. They're officially recognized by the Malian government as a terrorist entity, right? So they carried out an ambush against the Malian military, and they supposedly killed 40 Malian soldiers, along with several Russian private military contractors that were accompanying them. And the Ukrainians came out and proudly took credit for this attack, claiming that they supplied intelligence to these terrorists to carry out this stageless attack against the big bad Russians, because part of the Ukrainian strategy is to basically globalize their war against Russia. So then you'd have to ask the question, if Ukraine, which is essentially a NATO proxy, is supplying these terrorists in the Sahel with intelligence, what else could it be supplying them with? And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I guess the secondary question is, beyond that point, what are the terrorists claiming they're doing this for? I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're just murdering people, civilians. What is the objective that they're trying to accomplish, or the very least, let's say, their stated objective?
As far as it's possible to tell, so they're hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you. Right. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. So
I think he just froze. Okay, he froze. He'll be back. He'll be back. He'll be back. He has my infinite trust that he will be back. All right, he'll be back. Oh, there we are.
They're no longer trying to stage attacks against the Capitol and things like that. But they seem to have adopted a strategy of carrying out these sort of hit and run attacks in like littoral areas. So like areas near the border and stuff. So they carry out a hit and run strike. And then I guess their media amplifiers in the Western media then make a whole song and dance out of it. So recently there was an attack on a fuel tanker convoy in Mali. Next thing you know, the BBC and the rest of the Western media go out with this headline that terrorists have blockaded Bamako, that's the capital of Mali. They're preventing fuel from getting in. The situation is critical and yada yada. Meanwhile, the very next day, a new fuel convoy, which was under the protection of the Malian Air Force, made its way into Bamako, and the fuel scarcity was ended. That wasn't reported. So it would seem like, as far as the Sahel goes, a good part of the strategy is basically to discredit the Sahelian governments. Now, in Nigeria, that's where I guess the picture gets a bit more complicated, because Nigeria is not on the wrong side of, I guess, the people who are trying to discredit the Sahelian governments. Nigeria is basically a U.S. client state. So this is where it gets confusing for most people, because most people aren't able to understand. If Nigeria is basically a U.S. and French ally, why is Nigeria suffering from terrorism? It should just be a staging point, and those other people should be the victims, not Nigeria. But the thing is, even though Nigeria is being run by a client administration, by a puppet administration, just by its existence, just by its structure, Nigeria remains considered to be some kind of a threat, regardless of who is in power, regardless of who is the president, regardless of how it's governed. Just by its existence, it's considered to be a threat. So I would imagine that the strategy for the terrorists in Nigeria is not even to disgrace the Nigerian government, to discredit the Nigerian government, is to pick away at the very seams, the very corporate existence of the country. And I guess this is where pronouncements like the ones you heard recently from Donald Trump start to get important. You may have noticed that shortly after he made those noises about potentially carrying out airstrikes in Nigeria and all of that, his his cheerleaders, like white nationalist cheerleaders in the US and Europe, started flying flying kites across social media, talking about how potentially Nigeria needs to be split up. Some were talking about splitting it into a north and a south. Some were talking about splitting it into multiple countries. There's a particular guy, I forget his name. He works with NATO. He actually put out a map of Africa with Nigeria divided into like 6 countries. So I would imagine they have ultimately the design like a North Sudan, South Sudan type of solution for dealing with Nigeria. Because just by existing, Nigeria continues to be a threat. So I guess what their strategy is for Africa, which is to keep it poor, fragmented, disunited, unable to aggregate itself into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's what we're currently dealing with.
What was the reporting on the ground when Donald Trump made this notion of militarily invading Nigeria? I mean, as you point out, Nigeria is run by a puppet. And despite the fact that Nigeria is run by a puppet, they're still talking about militarily invading and attacking Nigeria. Now, it's unclear whether Donald Trump is being entirely serious about this, but the United States is run by psychopaths, so you can't necessarily put it past them when he says stuff like this. What was the response to this?
So the response was twofold in Nigeria. So there were those like me who came out to strongly condemn this, because obviously we understand very clearly that Nigeria is a sovereign country. And regardless of whatever pretext that anyone tries to use, talking about whether there's a genocide or whatever it is that may or may not be happening, it's simply not anybody's prerogative to waltz into a country and carry out military action. Those are not the rules on which the world is supposed to operate. It's a sovereign country. It has a military. If you feel so strongly about what may or may not be happening, engage it diplomatically. Right? That's what those diplomatic channels are for. If you feel like this country is not doing something you'd like it to do in a military sense, it's letting certain people die or whatever, you can offer military aid. You can do a bunch of things. Why are you threatening to essentially invade someone else's country? Especially a country that has the history that the US does in terms of invading other people's countries. So there was that reaction, which I would say, unfortunately, was probably the minority reaction.
Was it?
Yes. Now, the majority reaction.
Oh, please, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you're probably not going to enjoy what I'm about to say. So the majority reaction was split into 2. There were those who had this sort of studied indifference to it, like, well, the Nigerian government brought it on itself, so whatever, it is what it is. They did this to themselves. There was this weird sense of detachment, as though if the US government or the US military were to invade Nigeria, it would invade the Nigerian government and it wouldn't invade the Nigerian people. Or there seems to be this weird disconnect. People don't really understand that regardless of whether or not you approve of your government, regardless of whether or not you like your government, your country is your country. And if you let someone else destroy it for you, it's not going to matter whether you like the government or not, because you're not going to have a country any longer. Especially being that we're 2 borders away from the greatest example of this, which is Libya.
Yes.
So that was where, and then the second half of the second group were those who were openly cheerleading for this, those who were ecstatic because I'm going to use a term you've probably heard before, which is mental colonization, right? These are a very large group of Nigerians who have this very unfortunate idea that they are sort of deputy Americans. A lot of the media they consume is either American media or US funded. Most media they consume is US funded in some way, shape, or form. Nigeria's entire information space has been cornered for decades. So these are people who grew up watching and consuming American content and entertainment, reading American funded news and current affairs, and engaging the world from an American point of view. Right. So these are people who think, right, the big daddy, the superhero in the movie is here to save the day. Captain America is coming in to come and save us. So trying to explain to these people that when Captain America comes in to save a country, that country ends up looking like
Libya,
what Laos or Cambodia or Vietnam looked like, or what Libya currently looks like, or what Syria looks like. That's actually, or Afghanistan. That's actually what Captain America's intervention looks like. They don't understand what you're saying at all, because all they know is that America is the good guy, and these people, this group of people that we hate, call them terrorists, call them Islamists. Some even just hate Muslims as a whole, right? These people are the bad guys. So the good guy is here to save the bad guys, to save us from the bad guys. Right, so the bad guys are going to be defeated, and finally we shall be free, because Big Daddy Uncle Sam, and what further complicates this, in ways that I personally find so dismaying, is that a large proportion of this group of people that I've just described, they happen to be Christian, and not just Christian in the religious sense. They happen to be they're the type of Christians who again, because there's been this US capture of Nigeria's information space. So these people have grown up watching Kenneth Haji, whatever his name is. They've grown up watching basically all the big US prosperity preachers. They've grown up watching these people, and then they graduated to people like Charlie Kirk and whatnot. By the way, when Charlie Kirk died, there was a whole thing in Nigeria. Some people had a meltdown because there was this idea that, this guy's a soldier of Christ, he's one of us. So the fact that this guy was basically a racist who didn't rate Black people didn't even register, because they don't even see themselves as Africans or as Black people in that sense. They just see themselves as Christian. So they imagine, so this demographic of people imagines that when Stephen Miller talks about Christianity, that what he's describing is what they are familiar with as Christianity. So the concept of Christian nationalism, which is a concept that should horrify them, being the Black people that they are, they don't even understand what it means. They think that Christian nationalism is a good thing because it's Christian. It's about worshiping Jesus. So there's that very significant demographic who believe that, Uncle Sam is here to save them, because, and then Donald Trump obviously I believe this was deliberate. He kind of leaned into that with his message where he talked about, we're here to save our precious Christians. So, a lot of people their heads were absolutely blown by that. Oh my God, we have been recognized by the President of the United States. And he called us, so we are we are important to the greatest power in the world. So, and then you have people like me who have spent months or years trying to let this demographic know that in the geographical calculation of the world, your life is not really rated like that, right? Like, these people really don't care whether you're Christian or you're Muslim, whatever. What's important is the resources under your feet. And then Donald Trump comes and puts out that kind of statement and says, "Oh, Christians." So you can imagine how to those people it just looks like everything I'm saying has been nonsense, right? Because the president of the United States has acknowledged us directly. So every idea that we had about the primacy of Christianity as our primary identity layer has been validated by the fact that the president of the United States has name-checked us.
David,
So that's the situation.
That's so disturbing. God, that's so disturbing.
Yeah.
I mean, did they not see? And I guess people in Nigeria may be similar to people in the States in the way they watch media, but they didn't see Donald Trump shaking hands with Jelani in Syria, basically, saying how he's a tough guy, tough history. The guy was literally chopping off heads. The hand that Donald Trump shook was the hand that he used to literally cut off human beings' heads, separate the head from their shoulders.
So,
meaning that is Trump legitimizing terrorism. Like, we were backing that stuff. We were paying for that stuff. They don't see that.
As I'm sure you're aware, one significant drawback of engaging with religious people is that the very nature of religion makes it such that the logical core of your brain is completely bypassed, because religion is completely emotional.
Yeah.
It's not an intellectual thing. So when that being the case, you have the ability to selectively remember things, and you have the ability to selectively forget what you choose to forget. So there's a part of your brain that knows very well that Donald Trump is, first of all, he's not a Christian of any description, not in any meaningful sense. There's a part of your brain that knows that. There's nothing about this guy's lifestyle. There's nothing about this guy, even what he professes to be, that is Christian, first of all, on the one side. And then going further, you also understand that this guy has shaken hands with the devil multiple times. This guy is in bed with everyone it's possible to be in bed with. The Arab Muslims that you think are your enemies, this guy's, they gave him a jet as a gift. The Qataris, right? The Saudis are his very good friends, going back from well before he became president.
Yeah.
So they've been his financiers for decades. So there's a part of your brain that knows all this information, but because that information clashes with this other thing that you want to believe, which is that Donald Trump is a soldier of Christ who's here to save you from the Muslims, you then decide which of those things that you want to have primacy in your head. And because that second narrative is the one that you want to believe more, you just choose to ignore the other stuff. So yes, he shook hands with al-Jolani, the Syrian head chopper. It doesn't matter. I'm just not going to acknowledge it. I'm just not going to remember temporarily, because that doesn't, doesn't match with the narrative that I wish were the case.
That's disturbing. That's very disturbing to me. They seem to be downplaying the significance of the United States invading a country and what that means when we invade a country, and even the larger motives that may be associated with it. So in their mind, the U.S. is doing this for altruistic reasons. We're just coming to save Christians. That's what they think.
Yes.
Even though we've never done that anywhere else around the globe. Like, there is no situation where the United States acted in an altruistic way in regards to invading countries or going after countries. There's always something involved that we want to get. But in their minds,
at this point, I think you're preaching to the choir, because these are not people who, again, are intellectually driven. These are people who are emotionally driven. The emotional narrative that they want to believe is that we are Christian. No, so I guess the important context here is that for the longest of time in Nigeria, there's been, first of all, an ethnic rivalry, roughly speaking, between North and South. And because the North is, roughly speaking, majority Muslim, and the South is, roughly speaking, majority Christian, even though there's a significant Muslim population in the South as well. So for the longest time, and because Nigeria has fought a civil war before, which, even though it wasn't necessarily fought along religious lines, there was a significant ethnic component in that war. And because I guess the ethnic group that was on what you would call the losing side of the war was almost entirely Christian. And then the groups that were perceived to be the winners of the war, and certainly the Nigerian military, was dominated by members of one ethnicity who are overwhelmingly Muslim. So the idea was created in some quarters that Muslims defeated Christians and Muslims slaughtered Christians during the Civil War. So that's an idea that has existed for a very long time. So there's this deep wellspring of resentment. There's this deep grudge which has been there for decades, right? So then when you add to that the fact that when Boko Haram first became a thing, before it started slaughtering Muslims in the industrial numbers that it did, initially how it gained attention was that it went around like bombing churches, stuff like that. So it was very easy to sell a narrative that, oh my God, the Muslims are here again. You know, the Muslims are here to kill us. They're here to finish us off, you know, because and so they've always been tensions, they've always been clashes, they've always been deaths in, you know, scattered numbers here and there. When there's an election, for example, in 2011, the election that took place where the two front runners, that's the incumbent and the challenger, one was Christian, one was Muslim. So that election took on that characterization, and the incumbent won. He was a Christian, and there was a riot in the north, which is majority Muslim, and over 800 people died. Wow. So these resentments have been there for a very long time. So it's very easy to see why, for some, it really doesn't matter what people like me have to say. It doesn't matter how much data we can show. It doesn't matter whether we can prove what we're saying intellectually. All they know is that the Christians are the victims and the good guys. The Muslims are the aggressors and the bad guys. And anyone who is here to fight for the Christians and fight against the Muslims and, you know, get rid of the Muslims for us is the good person. So the world in their minds is divided into this very binary place, which obviously you and I know that's not how the world works at all.
That is not the way the
world
works.
They have been conditioned. They have been conditioned to see the world exclusively in terms of who is Christian and who is Muslim, to the point where even during the genocide in Gaza, the entire conversation in Nigeria was basically defined by who was Christian and who was Muslim. So those who consider themselves to be Christian were supporting Israel because they thought that as being a Zionist or whatever somehow puts you, you know, on the side of Jesus, right?
But it doesn't.
And then
They destroyed every church.
And then those who consider themselves Muslim were obviously on the side of Palestine, not because there was any real intellectual understanding of the monstrosity that Palestine is undergoing and the wider implications for the rest of the world, but simply because all Palestinians are Muslims. So they are Muslim brothers. So that's a very unfortunate, reality that Nigeria deals with.
Do you know they destroyed every church that was in Gaza? They just eliminated every church. They didn't care if they were Christians. They didn't care if they were Muslim. They just wanted to take the land. Like the idea that that's this, oh God, man, that sucks so bad. Because to me, I look at it as like human beings are being killed. That's the way I look at it, right? And they're looking at it as, well, they're killing Muslims, so it's okay.
Yeah. And if you were to tell them, for example, that there's a significant Palestinian Christian population, they'd look at you funny. Because I've actually told someone this before and he accused me of lying.
But there is a significant Palestinian Christian population.
Yeah, but I was accused of lying. I made it up. All Palestinians are, you know, rag-wearing Arab Muslim terrorists. Apparently. You know, I should also mention that in as much as US media obviously plays a very large role in this large-scale industrial brainwashing of Nigerians, it probably won't surprise you to know that there's also a lot of Israeli presence as well. Maybe not as visible as the US presence, but the Israeli presence, the Israeli influence is there as well. So a lot of these narratives, which people now believe, were not organic, right? Something pushed them into people's minds. And if you examine where the funding pipeline of that something is, a lot of the time it leads back to Tel Aviv. And I'll give you an example of this. So for partly as a result of the Civil War, right? Because the Civil War, the region that tried to succeed, which, as I said, was majority Christian and dominated by one ethnic group, even after the war, that secessionist idea continued. It didn't die after the war. So the people you hear calling themselves Biafran separatists, that's where that came from. And sometimes, so I grew up understanding Biafran separatism to be like a thing that was discussed by like men in their 50s and the 60s who witnessed the war and who had grudges. It was an old people's thing.
Yeah.
Then sometime around 2012, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there appears this charismatic, young, for lack of a better term, leader who emerges, and his name is Nnamdi Kanu. He emerged pretty much out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, he set up like a pirate radio station called Radio Biafra, and it had reach all over that region of Nigeria, and he became this extremely powerful, influential figure. And then the violence started, because then he started encouraging his followers to take up arms and things like that. Wow. And currently he's in prison now. He's accused of terrorism and all of that. But the point is, when you then examine how all of this happened, how did that meteoric rise happen pretty much out of nowhere? You realize, for example, that this guy, so Biafra, the ethnic group that makes up the majority of what calls itself Biafra is the Igbo ethnic group, right? These are West Africans. These have always been West Africans. They are 102% West African with a 2% margin of error. If you go to complete joke, right? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, you start hearing about how they're supposedly the 12th tribe of Israel, the 13th, the lost tribe of Israel, and they have a Jewish origin. And then the Biafran flag, which has always been, the flag was inspired by the tricolor flag of Marcus Garvey. That's the red, black, and the green, right?
Yeah.
That has always been the Biafran flag. All of a sudden, a Star of David appears in the middle of the Biafran flag.
What?
Right. And then this guy, the leader, Nnamdi Kanu, he shows up like out of nowhere. He appears at, that famous wall in Israel that people go and do that
the
thing.
Wailing Wall. Yeah.
He shows up there, and there's a photo up, and he's dressed in like those traditional like Hebrew outfit with the thing on his head, and it's like, what is going on here? I thought you were an ethnic Igbo separatist who was Christian. Now all of a sudden you're talking about infusing like Jewish mythology into this separatist idea that you have, and then Radio Biafra has resources that nobody can explain how. So there was I think it was in 2015 or 2016, the largest telecoms company in Nigeria is called MTN. They discovered that some of their engineers had actually been paid to install Radio Biafra transmitters on MTN mobile telecoms masts. So basically, MTN infrastructure was being used as a piggyback for this Radio Biafra thing. So you now then ask yourself, this thing which basically started off as a YouTube channel, with which money were they able to get radio transmitters? These things are not cheap.
They hijacked.
And you're talking about a region, like the entire southeastern region of Nigeria. That's at least 200,000 square kilometers. That everywhere is covered by this radio station. How did they get transmitters in that number and of that quality to cover the entirety of a region of Nigeria with this blanket propaganda message? And when you dig into it, almost inevitably everything leads back to Tel Aviv. So that's where all of this is coming from. It's not because Nigerian people are just dumb, right? There's been an industrial brainwashing effort from so many different angles to ensure that people are conditioned to see the world in ways that are not true, to see the world in very reductive, foolish binaries, and to see pictures that are not there, and to identify themselves in ways that are not useful to their own development.
Wow. David, I am always, you always educate me every time you come on. I swear to God, you do. I learned so much in these conversations, and I hope the audience also does. Thank you for this. Honest to God, man, I really appreciate it. David Houdayan, he is.
Go figure. Follow me.